Chapter 1300. Duque was at a loss for words. As expected, different people had different ways of thinking. In essence, Duque was selfish. In his heart, he always had a priority list. First, he had to protect himself, then his harem, then his friends and family. On this basis, Duque did not mind being a hero and saving his country and the world. But a true hero would first be the world, then the country, and finally the individual. No one was born great, but those with noble bloodlines could also fall into the deepest darkness. No matter what kind of education or circumstances a person received to have such a grand idea and then put it into action, they should be praised and praised. Even if the sky collapsed, the tall one would hold it up. If no one was willing to be the tall hero, then when the sky finally collapsed, the short one would not be able to survive either. Everyone understood this logic, but how many could actually do it? Obviously, Khadgar was one of them. In this life, Duque seemed to have absorbed Khadgar's fate, shouldering many responsibilities that should have been Khadgar's, completing even greater feats than Khadgar himself. From the bottom of his heart, Duque still felt a little guilty. The human heart was very complicated. It was true that Duque could continue to cheat others and trick Khadgar into becoming his magic battery after he improved himself. But what about in the future? Thus, before things got worse, Duque used the parallel world method to improve Khadgar, which was actually a way to save his own soul. Unexpectedly, Khadgar laughed and said, "The world is about to be destroyed by demons. I don't care who's going to be the hero." These words seemed crude, but were actually filled with philosophy. Duque's heart was relieved. So this is the so-called gauging the heart of a gentleman with one's own yardstick? Suddenly he laughed bitterly. Speaking of which, this method of infusing illusions was actually displaying different fates and tempering other people's souls, and it was really effective. Let alone Duque, even the other 5 elemental emissaries could feel the strength of Khadgar's soul. To be honest, before this, Dark Witch Farina had looked down on Khadgar. She could not imagine why Duque would choose such a weak soul to be the core of his 6 elements. Who would have thought that a miracle that seemed to happen frequently but was actually impossible to replicate had happened? Originally, Khadgar's soul power was the lowest among the 6 elemental emissaries, but he had quickly become the strongest among them. This made Farina extremely envious. She stepped out of the ranks, bowed slightly, and placed her right hand on her left chest. However, her fair arm was sandwiched between 2 Mount Hyjal, which made her look more alluring. "My lord, what I did to Khadgar just now, can I try it on me as well? If the elemental emissary is powerful, won't you benefit even more, my lord?" Duque glanced at her. Of course he knew what she was thinking. Duque didn't get angry and said, Khadgar saw his own fate in a different timeline, but the things he experienced, the choices he made, the pressure he endured, and Khadgar's indomitable will were the key to his growth. "Are you sure you want to see it too?" "I'm sure," Farina said with a look of great loyalty. Duque didn't waste any more time and directly connected with his mind. Then, how could the evil Black Witch be treated the same as the good young Khadgar? The miserable Farina saw many scenes, most of which were fabricated by Duque using the system Elf. In the past, in order to farm for equipment in the game, Duque had led his team to Naxxramas over and over again. Thus, Duque simply made a 3D image of Farina's memories in the game and showed it to Farina. Yes, Khadgar was indomitable, while Farina was beaten like a boss in the game over and over again. How could it be the same? In the image of fate, the first half was mostly Farina's memories, but the end of every fate was death. It wasn't that she didn't try to resist, but no matter what method she used to improve herself, she was still defeated in the end. Thousands of reincarnations in the illusory world only lasted a few seconds in reality. Soon, Farina returned from the fate with a pale face. "Yo, Farina, it seems that you still can't be indomitable." Duque comforted Farina hypocritically. Sob, sob, sob. "As expected, submitting to my lord is my only chance to break free from my fate. My lord, you are my final salvation." If there weren't so many people watching, Farina would definitely cry and shout as she hugged Duque's thigh, begging for forgiveness. Yes, Farina's loyalty +10. After dealing with all the elemental emissaries, Duque finally heaved a sigh of relief. Sensing Khadgar's soul undulations, which were as powerful as a raging river, Duque secretly made an assessment, breaking dawn. That's it. Only this Khadgar could truly help Duque. Duque returned to the throne of arcane energy, sat upright, and slightly raised his head. I hereby announce that in 3 days, I will officially break through to the demigod realm. All the preparations were completed. Before breaking through to the demigod realm, Duque contacted his lovers for the last time. He knew that Tyrande was currently planning to uproot the insect nests in Silithus. Clipping off Thun's wings was something that could not be rushed. At the same time, it was to buy time for Duque. You must come back. I know you are very confident, but you must be careful and prioritize your own safety. I'll wait for you. The magic communication was filled with blessings, as well as a hint of sadness. Regardless of which lover it was, they all knew that this was Duque's path. Although no one knew where Duque's magical path would end, as long as Duque himself decided to stop, as Duque's lovers and most loyal supporters, they had no reason to hold him back. Don't worry. I will succeed. Duque's calm smile revealed his strong confidence. 3 days was not a long time, and it passed very quickly. The experts loyal to Duque had already entered Karazhan. On the first floor were the guardian knights of Duke Marcus's family, and then Edwin Van Cleef was in charge. In addition, the 2 maids Vanessa and Solarian were also in charge. Duque was at the highest floor of Karazhan, and he had begun to go all out. In an independent space the size of 2 football fields, the ground was covered with magic formations with complicated patterns. These magic formations used the most primitive magic runes of Azeroth, draconic runes. They had many functions such as defending against enemies, communicating with the elemental realm, and so on. All the preparations had been done to the limit that Duque could do. Outside the magic formation, the 6 elemental emissaries were ready. Duque abandoned all distracting thoughts and let out a long breath. Let's begin. Chapter 1301. Becoming a wizard was a step-by-step process of training. If Earth and Sky wizards were purely communicating with heaven and earth and grasped the power to influence the world, then Morning Star, Radiant Moon and Breaking Dawn would further introduce magic from the elemental world, refining their own power and producing something similar to a nuclear reactor, producing magic in a form that was almost perpetual. Once they advanced further, they would be able to communicate with the entire world with power that surpassed the mortal realm. Demigods were existences that had stepped into the realm of gods. After reading through a large number of ancient books, Duque knew that demigods in Azeroth were not simply demigods who had divinity and used it. With divinity, they could only be regarded as pure divine beings, just like the 6 elemental emissaries that Duque had modified. True demigods would forever be a part of Azeroth. Unless they were completely destroyed at their roots, demigods could theoretically be resurrected infinitely. For example, Cenarius' father, the strongest demigod, White Deer Malorn, had been dead for 10,000 years. Who knew that his corpse would come back to scare people? Oh no, to fight against evil. Duque stood in the middle of the magic formation with a hexagram as its shape. He calmed down and even paused the system elf's assistance, using the power of a wizard to feel the world. Silence. Silence. Complete and utter silence. He closed his eyes and turned off his vision, even using magic to prevent any light from entering his eyes through his eyelids. He used a small amount of magic to turn off his hearing, unable to hear anything from the outside world. 2 thin layers of arcane elemental isolation appeared in his nostrils, filtering out all smells. In the sea of consciousness, he isolated his tongue's sense of taste. Finally, his entire soul was pulled out of his body under the effect of the magic formation. It was a very mysterious feeling. His body was clearly below him, but he was floating in the air. Instead of looking back at his body like a curious baby, Duque let go of his spiritual touch. It extended out from the room. The next second, he felt all the sensations in Karazhan, the sound of the wind echoing in the corridor, the spiritual energy undulations of the patrolling Einherjar, the flow of air through the tiny cracks in the walls. In the next second, his spirit sense spread to the entire upwind trail, and he sensed the vitality hidden under the charred ground. In the third second, Duque's senses had spread to the entire planet Azeroth. Although the feedback was very vague and there were many uncertainties, Duque was very sure that he could already feel the world's breathing, pulse, the cycle of life, and the world's pain. The closest pain came from the southeast, where the cursed land was located. The door of darkness was like a wound left behind by a sharp weapon. Not only was it unable to heal, it was also like an abscess that caused the world to bleed in pain. In the far northwest was Mount Hyjal. The destruction of the Holy Mountain and the World Tree had undoubtedly left a deep scar on this land. The more recent pain came from the far west, and Duque instinctively sensed that it was Silithus. The ancient god sea, Thun, was overdrawing the power of the earth to create its insect servants almost infinitely. However, after the pain, Azeroth's immune system seemed to have been stimulated, or it could be said that Azeroth, which had the consciousness of the cycle of life, finally produced the most intense stress response. That's right. Mother Earth was awakening, and in her unique way, she was protecting herself and every life on this planet. Duque could clearly feel that the shackles of the upper limit of life had been unlocked by Azeroth, and the upper limit of the world's power for the mortal guardians was also rising. Since the door of darkness, Duque had regarded himself as the guardian of the world, and he had earnestly fulfilled his obligations as a guardian. At the same time, Duque felt the favor of the goddess of fate, and after Thun came out to cause trouble, he quickly obtained a few portions of divinity. Although Duque wanted to attribute all the success to his own efforts, Duque's subconscious was very clear that everything was not a coincidence. Some people were born with divine strength. Some people were born with wisdom. And some people were often accompanied by luck. However, in the mortal world, fate was ever-changing. The fate of millions of people was like duckweed, surging with the waves, unable to control themselves. Even so, the ones who succeeded in the end were the combination of talent, hard work, and luck, and the true king who grew up after experiencing countless tribulations. So today, at the beginning of the opening of the world's authority, Duque wanted to be the first person to eat crabs. When his soul began to sing and began to call the whole world. Almost immediately, the world responded to Duque. With the appearance of the purple-blue pillar of light at the top of Karazhan's tower, the entire Eastern Kingdom continent, and even the entire world of Azeroth, all professionals and transcendents felt an inexplicable throbbing in their hearts. Every powerful existence, one by one, turned their heads and looked in the direction of Karazhan, following the direction of the throbbing in their hearts. The world in front of them seemed to have stopped at this moment. The wind was still, and the leaves were hanging quietly. The sand in the air maintained its tumbling posture. Even in the Silithus worm nest, the flying and spinning broken limbs stopped spinning in the air. The light of dawn penetrated the thick clouds and poured down on the earth without any scruples. The whole world was quiet and quiet. Everything in the world fell into silence, as if everything had completely calmed down, bowing its head and making way for the scene that was about to happen. In the center of the endless sea, the big whirlpool that used to be the well of eternity seemed to have changed for no reason. The center of the whirlpool, which was originally spinning clockwise, as if it wanted to suck all the seawater in the world into the other world, suddenly stopped. There was not a single ripple on the surface of the sea, like a mirror reflecting the color of the sky. Unknowingly, Duque opened his eyes, and in his pupils, there was the same whirlpool-like arcane light as in the original endless sea. This time was very short, less than 1/10 of a second, and then his pupils became clear again. Even though it was very short, Khadgar was still sharp enough to capture this detail. Khadgar's clear voice was perfectly connected, and the resonance of the soul was immediately produced. In the name of the Wanderer of the Stars, the Seeker of Knowledge, and the Supreme Ruler of Arcane Magic, I declare to the world, my Lord, Duke Marcus, is the Master of Arcane Magic. At this moment, all the mages in the world felt that the magic power in their bodies had begun to slightly deviate. The core of their magic power was leaving them in fear. Chapter 1302. The Lord of the Arcane. It meant that a brand new existence had declared its dominion over arcane power in the name of the world to all mages who used arcane spells in the world. Although this dominion was not complete or absolute, and as long as one carefully sensed it, they would realize that this dominion excluded the dragons. However, being controlled by others was never something that made Pharaoh happy. For example, if a true god who controlled a certain domain wanted to use magic in that domain, he had to use it in the name of that existence and follow its rules. The goddess of the moon Elun was an example. To use any magic related to the moon, the incantation had to be preceded by the words, "In the name of the goddess of the moon Elun." Usually, one had to offer sacrifices to the goddess of Elun, such as overflowing magic or faith, and use the incantation at the critical moment. Only then would the goddess of the moon care about you. In a domain that was monopolized, it was unreasonable. If you lowered your head, there would be a deal. If you were unhappy, then you could only scram and not use this power. Of course, the one who made the declaration was only a demigod, and his dominion over that domain was not complete. At this time, one had to make a choice. If they were really unhappy, they could add something like "free arcane magic" in front of the incantation to announce that they were using unowned magic. However, if that demigod became a true god in the future, the person who used unowned magic back then would be recorded in a little black book. Then, when he became a god, he would come back to settle the score. Burning that part of your magic circuit was a small matter, but what was worse was that your children and grandchildren would be forbidden from using it. That would be a big problem. Moreover, the one who had announced to become the Lord of the Arcane was Duke Marcus. Countless mages' expressions changed drastically, especially Anastrian from Cuel Salus, who was now the leader of the Forgotten Ones. He gripped his staff tightly with his bony claws that were so dry that there was not a trace of moisture in them. This feeling was like Duque had slapped him in the face. One slap on the left, one slap on the right. Then, it repeated endlessly. She was so close to slapping out a few of his white teeth. The only good thing was that Duque had only just begun to try to become a demigod. First, he might not succeed. Second, he was still miles away from becoming a true god. Unfortunately, he was still unhappy. It was clearly his own power, but in his own soul, in his own magic circuit, the wandering arcana energy was being extracted. The arcana energy that was branded with Duque name was forcefully descending. Its unstoppable power was taking over and changing everything. Not every wizard was named a Nastrian, and not every wizard had crossed the threshold of Radiant Moon. From this moment onwards, all wizards below the Radiant Moon realm had to quickly recite the words in the name of Duke Marcus before using any arcane magic. Otherwise, they would have to wait for some great power to develop new arcana spells so that they could bypass Duque's arcana rule. Only then could they use arcana spells again. In the Dalajan, in the Sin Dorii Kingdom, in the Eastern Kingdom, and in Kalimdor, every spellcaster subconsciously raised their heads to look at the sky. They discovered that the ever-changing arcane energy was constantly gathering and scattering in the sky, forming strange and blurry scenes. Mediocre people could only watch the show. Capable people looked at what Duque had shown them after swearing his oath as the Lord of Arcana. It was a brand new arcana secret. I, Khadgar, in the name of Duke Marcus Elemental Emissary, hereby declare that the subtleties of arcana should be known by the world and understood by the world. The power of arcana should be concentrated in the hands of the good, the explorers of magic, and the devout. My Lord wishes to accomplish all good deeds in the world. My Lord wishes to destroy all evil deeds in the world. Those who are willing to follow this will and this righteousness, please walk with my Lord. Khadgar's soul declaration was transmitted through the world will, and all the mages in the world were in an uproar. If Duque had just tyrannically declared his power, then this was a classic example of enticing and expressing his stance. These words had two meanings. The first was that there would be rewards for those who believed in him. These rewards were the metamagic abilities, arcane subtlety, and arcane concentration, that the mages themselves had to comprehend. As for the former, arcane subtlety, any decent mage would have to figure out a way to learn it on their own. This was because it could reduce your target's magic resistance by 10 points and reduce the threat of your arcane spells by 40%. There were always people with thick skin in this world. For example, the warriors of the Blackrock tribe were born with high fire resistance. 10 points of resistance was a unit that could reduce the enemy's resistance by a considerable amount. And the threat was to make the enemy more wary of you. For example, if you cut the enemy's arm after they had been anesthetized, they wouldn't feel any pain and wouldn't feel like you were hitting them. Arcane concentration was to further reduce the enemy's resistance to your arcana magic. These two metamagic abilities were very painful even for high-ranked mages. If they rejected Duke, it would mean that they would have to say goodbye to these two metamagic abilities forever. The second meaning was even more direct. Damn it, I'm on the side of justice and kindness. Those who are neutral are fine, but those who are evil can all get out of here. Almost as soon as these words came out, the entire Dalagen was in an uproar. Long live! Praise be to Duke Marcus. In any world, power was in the shape of a pyramid, and those with ultimate power were always in the minority. Most of them were ordinary people at the bottom. Duke's announcement meant that almost every decent mage, as long as they weren't evil cultists, would automatically have two metamagic abilities. For a large group of mages, this was a huge increase in power, or at least 20%. Almost at the same time that Khadgar made the announcement on behalf of Duke, more information regarding arcana magic was transmitted to the souls of the mages, such as the standard of using arcana magic, and that the starting point for exploring arcana magic was to be a Morning Star mage. Every spellcaster could feel Duke's strictness, as well as his demand for mastery of arcana magic. Duke, who was in the middle of the spell formation, did not say a word. He subconsciously lowered his head and found that beneath his feet was no longer a spell formation, nor was it earth, nor was it mountains and rivers. Instead, it was a world of nothingness, with only arcana elements left. This world still had the outline of planet Azeroth. He could even transcend matter and space and directly see the souls on the other side of the planet, on the Kalimdor continent. Souls of all colors. Although there were countless souls fleeing from this illusory world of arcana magic, some of them were spinning strangely, some were trembling, and some were even desperately trying to break away from this world of arcana magic. Duke sensed that they were things that had begun to decay. Calamity Army. The Forgotten. The corner of Duke's mouth lifted into a mysterious smile. Chapter 1303. The complicated prayers lasted for an hour. Duke was also a little helpless. There was nothing he could do about it. This was because the arcane technique was the core of a mage, and it was also the core of his breakthrough to the demigod realm. Simply crossing the threshold of a demigod wasn't that complicated. If he didn't want to improve, he could just say that he was the guardian of XXX. For example, the wild boar demigod Igamagan, who was killed by two third-rate void dukes. Although he was said to have transformed into the Razor Highland that protected the boars and the boar people after his death, Duke still felt that he was useless. Duke had ambitions and dreams. Otherwise, he would not step into the god domain and just go with the flow like a commoner. Since he wanted to destroy the Burning Legion and break through to the divine realm, then he had to aim for the position of true god. Therefore, from the very beginning, Duke had chosen a broader and more powerful domain as the core strength for his breakthrough into the demigod realm. Duke's announcement to the souls of the entire world made Jaina and Alicia very happy, because from this moment on, they could use other methods to quickly and accurately find out about their lover's condition. Of course, no one knew if those who offended Jaina would have their magic banned after she gave them pillow talk. Just when the pharaoh of the world thought that Duke would be lucky enough to become an arcana god, the pharaoh of the world, in Karazhan, the second elemental emissary stepped out. The manager, Major Domo Executus, was a fire demon. This was because the pharaoh were currently experiencing the soul connection from the world. Whether they wanted to or not, they had to pay attention to it. If Khadgar, who was the first to run out, could be said to have won the hearts of most of the pharaoh races, then Major Domo Executus, who had just run out, had truly shocked many pharaoh races. Damn, a fire demon had come out. What the hell was this? After all, not every pharaoh knew that Duke was so awesome that he accepted a fire demon as his underling. There was no doubt that Major Domo Executus affected the appearance of the city. He looked weak, but his strength was actually at the level of a boss. The special characteristics of the fire demon made it very difficult to defeat or even kill him with the support of the fire element. He raised his arms high, and the horn-like spikes on the outside of his arms and on his back made a cracking sound when he raised his hands. Every pharaoh in the world noticed that they were hallucinating on their retinas. Countless tiny flames were circling around them, even floating up and flying into the sky. Majordomo Executus' slightly strange accent echoed in the hearts of the pharaoh. I, the fire demon Executus, in the name of my lord, the conqueror of the molten core, the slayer of the fire demon King Ragnaros, and the supreme ruler of the land of fire, declare to the world that my lord is the lord of fire. Almost as soon as Majordomo finished his soul declaration, the entire magic world, and even the entire fire elemental world experienced a magnitude 12 earthquake. Since ancient times, the four elemental realms had always been in the hands of the four elemental lords. Their dominance over the four elements could be traced back to the War of the Sovereigns 25,000 years ago. Before that, there were no written records of the world. Therefore, Duque's declaration that he was the Lord of Fire was no longer a slap in the face, but a complete declaration of war. As the saying went, cutting off one's path to wealth was like killing one's parents. By doing this, Duque had undoubtedly abused all of Ragnaros' ancestors. Although Lager probably had no ancestors to say, anyway, Duque didn't care. Facing the extremely violent and furious Ragnaros, Duque had already destroyed one of his most important clones. According to the original history, in the future, in the land of fire in Lager's lair, the mortal heroes would definitely fight with Lager. Offending him once was offending him n times was also offending him. Since he had offended Ragnaros to death, Duque wouldn't give Ragnaros any face and directly announced that he was the Lord of Fire. If Duque's declaration to all the pharaoh in the world that he was the Lord of Arcane Magic was slightly overbearing, then it was undeniably domineering now. Almost immediately, Ragnaros, who had been forced to sleep due to being injured again, was forced to wake up. After confirming the soul transmission again, Lager was extremely furious. Duke Marcus, you despicable person who colluded with a traitor to destroy my clones and my holy land. I won't spare you. Just you wait, I swear I will burn you and this damn world to ashes. At this moment, almost every mage could feel the terrifying waves of anger coming from the fire elemental realm. However, the reaction of the pharaoh was, good. Well done. His Excellency Duke Marcus is mighty and domineering. Almost every mage cheered and jumped for joy. It was simple. Compared to the ownerless arcane elements, the more primitive fire element basically had a master, and its master was the elemental demigod Ragnaros. Of course, this guy wasn't a good person. He had always occupied the fire element and forbade anything other than fire elemental beings from using it. However, when he fought against the Titans in the War of Domination, he was viciously defeated. In the end, he was greatly injured and imprisoned in the elemental plane, losing his absolute control over the fire element. This was why mortal mages had the opportunity to use the fire element. Of course, in order to avoid Lager's lord, the mages had no choice but to choose spells that consumed more magic power. Duque had complained countless times in the past. Playing with fire spells really consumes a lot of magic power. Now that Duque was fighting Ragnaros for control over the fire element, no matter what the result was, at least he could vent his anger. Moreover, Duque was now making a big deal out of it. With a wave of his hand, he announced that as long as he succeeded in becoming a demigod, the magic power consumption of all fire spells would be reduced by 20%. This time, every mage was so excited that they cried out in joy. But I can't. Lord Duke Marcus, please succeed in becoming a demigod. Please become the god of mages. All of the Dalajan, and even all of the pharaoh's compatriots in the magic world were in an uproar. With the ecstasy of the fire element and the elemental emissary of the ice element, the ice dragon Saffron appeared. The prayer changed. I am Saffron. In the name of my lord, Duke Marcus, I declare that my lord is the incarnation of frost, the transcender of absolute zero, the blizzard that freezes all evil. This time, it sounded very famous. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that Duque's demand for the frost domain was relatively low. It was just enough for him to use. Others were puzzled by this. Why was Duque so domineering towards other domains, but so uninterested in the frost domain? Jaina was the only one who burst into tears. Sparkling tears streamed down her exquisite face. She knew that it wasn't that Duque didn't have the courage to do it, but that the god of ice element was left for her to break through. Chapter 1304. Duque announced that his divine realm involved 3 elements. In the eyes of outsiders, Duque definitely wanted to become the god of mages. It was natural for the strongest archmage to want to break through the limits and become the god of mages. No one was surprised. Just like when Medivh borrowed the magic of the Tirisfal Parliament to break through to the demigod realm, he chose the space magic that he was best at. That was why Medivh was an interstellar wanderer. Before this, only mages were affected. Because it was a time of war, many pharaoh had priests around him. Regarding this grand occasion, the priests held an indifferent attitude and came to watch the show. At most, they carefully savored the special elemental aura around the mages. Soon they found something strange. The air was filled with the familiar holiness of the priests and holy knights. It was as if they were in the Holy Church of Stratholme, or the Lights Hope Chapel in the Eastern Plaguelands. The holy statues of the sages stood in the middle of it, gazing at everyone with eyes that seemed to transcend time and space. Wait, don't tell me Lord Duke Marcus wants to dabble in the holy light too? They guessed right. The next person who appeared shocked all the priests and made them lose the ability to speak. This was because in their spiritual vision, they saw the former Archbishop of Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. Holy light above, Lord Fail has been resurrected? Look at his body, it's translucent. Is that a Holy Spirit? It should be. In the elemental domain, most priests were amusing idiots with little knowledge. They would never guess that Alonso's was now a light elemental creature. I, Alonso's Fail, accept the request of my friend Duke Marcus to be his envoy of holy light. In the name of my friend, I swear that my friend is the preacher of holy light, the guardian of truth and justice. My friend will spread the 3 great virtues and dispel all evil in the world. From the perspective of the origin of the world, this announcement was not the most powerful one. But from the perspective of the mortal world, this announcement caused the most shock. In the church square of Stormwind City, the commoners who gathered to pray every day saw the entire church of holy light emitting dazzling golden light that pierced the clouds. In the distance, people seemed to hear countless little angels singing happily. In the church, every monk, priest, and holy knight saw it with their own eyes. The statue of the sage was actually trembling slightly. The holy light surging on the statue was like the ripples set off by the wind blowing on the surface of the water, one after another, shaking non-stop. Holy light above. Praise you, Duke Marcus. Sure enough, your name will become sacred. Duke Marcus, your name will indeed become holy. If Dukla's appearance of Alonso's Fail could be said to be shocking, then the appearance of Dark Witch Farina would cause the warlocks to be burnt to a crisp. Although Farina had tried her best to wear a dignified gown, she had played the honey trap for so long. Her coquettish charm had already seeped into every corner of her soul. Therefore, her every move seemed so charming. Even her declarations seemed to be an invitation. I am Farina, the Black Witch. I have answered the call of my lord, and I hereby announce to the world that my lord is the Blade of Darkness. He does not use the power of darkness, but does things of light. After Farina, it was Thaddeus' turn to make a similar announcement. However, after the initial shock, his existence seemed to be dispensable. Only the druids and shamans, who were closest to nature and used the power of wind and lightning, heard Thaddeus' announcement. They were extremely embarrassed. Damn it, you're a mage, yet you've already dabbled in the power of wind and lightning. Then what are we, the true envoys of nature, supposed to do? What was interesting was that Sal had heard it too. The tribal chief had a constipated expression on his face. The world-class announcement of the 6 elemental emissaries was indeed shocking. Duque knew very well that this was just an appetizer. It could even be a stepping stone for a mortal to step into the god realm. One could only rely on themselves to pass the trial. Countless extraordinary beings in the world had their eyes on the outside of Karazhan. Even though Karazhan's perfect protection blocked these gazes from directly peeping inside, Duque could still clearly feel all this. Some were kind, curious, malicious, prying, and there were also those who were ready to watch a joke. Although Duque used arcane, fire, and ice as his foundation, and the other 3 as supplements, it seemed clear at first glance that he had a wide range of powers and a promising future. Only the extraordinary knew that the difficulty for Duque to step into the god realm was already dozens of times higher than that of ordinary weak demigods. Considering that Duque was going to fight Ragnaros, the king of fire demons, in the end, the increase in difficulty caused by the difficulty of invisibility was immeasurable. What the outside world thought and did was the outside world's business. Even though outside the magic array, his 6 elemental emissaries were constantly chanting prayers, Duque was completely unaware of it. He calmed down, completely calming down. At the same time, he slowly opened the system genie. With the help of the system, he adjusted every cell in his body, striving to make the compatibility between his body and soul infinitely close to 100%. The magic hidden in his blood began to flow with the pulse of his heart, pouring into every corner of his body. In the magic circuit, with the arcane circuit as the core, ice and fire as supplements, holy, shadow, and thunder as secondary, it began to carry out an orderly self-cycle, spreading the benefits. Bothump, bothump. The beating of the heart and the pulsation of the magic circuit turned into a sound. The sound became louder and louder, like the beating of a drum, resounding through the highest levels of Karazhan. At this time, Duque's appearance had completely changed. It looked like Duque, except that his outline was still Duque. He no longer looked like a human with a physical body. The energy of the 6 major elements appeared on the surface of Duque's body, forming countless curved lines. These thin lines were like hundreds of thousands of spider webs, densely covering the surface of Duque's skin. In the surrounding void, countless elemental energy was attracted over, and after being filtered by the magic array, it became extremely pure energy, shooting towards the surface of Duque's body and quickly penetrating his whole body. At first, there was only a faint glow under Duque's skin, but then the faint glow that emerged became more and more intense, and then became even more dazzling. His whole body seemed to have become a complete elemental body. That was only on the surface, and in fact, the transformation was not yet complete. Duque carefully controlled the balance of elemental energy in his body through the system. Even with the help of the system, this was still a task that required great care. Dancing on the edge of a blade could not describe the difficulty of this task. Chapter 1305. If he had to use a word to describe it, it would be like driving a sports car at 300 km per hour on a bad road where a few pieces of gravel could jump out at any time, with one hand on the steering wheel and the other out of the window, and then, in an instant, complete the standard sense of threading a needle. This was not something that could be done after showing off and running away. If he was not careful, not only would he explode in minutes, even Karazhan, and even half of the Elven Forest and Twilight Forest would suffer. Duque clenched his teeth, and then, like embroidery on a grain of rice, he carefully controlled the system elf to further purify the seemingly pure elements that had been absorbed into his body. With arcane spells as the foundation, flames and frost as the branches, and holy, shadow, and thunder as the support, he separated the impurities from his body at high speed while further fusing the magic. He carefully compressed them, wrapped them with his consciousness, and directed them to where they needed to go under his spiritual guidance. At the same time, every drop of magic was branded with Duque's soul. It was a very fast process. Even though there were tens of thousands of pores all over his body that were filled with magic, Duque, with the help of the system elf, seemed to have divided his soul into tens of thousands of parts, and each part was doing its own job: filtration, purification, sublimation. His soul was in great pain. The pain that exceeded the limits of the physical body was not something that could be suppressed by any type of anesthetic. Because, in a sense, Duque was giving up his human body and was transitioning into a spiritual body that was close to an elemental body. Very painful. Very painful. Heart-wrenching pain. So painful that his skin was cracking inch by inch. The feeling of being torn into millions of pieces and then ground into powder almost made Duque collapse. But when the pain reached its peak, all of a sudden, it disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a sublimation. His whole soul was light, and under his feet, there seemed to be a colorful, blurry world that was opening a door that belonged only to him, Duque. Come. Welcome, our new companion. A misty neutral voice said in the common language. The 6 elements stood in a 6-pointed star position, floating behind Duque. His soul slowly descended, and the next moment, Duque felt as if a certain unimportant memory of his was being asked if he could read it. Duque subconsciously agreed. Then, a majestic palace appeared in front of him. It was a Gothic palace, somewhat similar to Notre Dame de Paris, an epoch-making landmark in the history of European architecture on Earth. The first thing that came into view was the towering spire that pierced through the clouds. The facade had a unique style, and the structure was rigorous. It looked very majestic and solemn. It is divided longitudinally by pilasters into 3 blocks, and horizontally by 3 bands of ornamentation, of which, at the bottom, there are 3 recessed doorways. Above the doorway was the so-called demigod corridor. On it were statues representing the forest god Cinereus, the white deer god Malorn, and many others. Higher up was the corridor of the true god. There were clearly 6 statues, but the only ones that Duque could distinguish were the moon goddess Elun and sea, Thun. The rest were all blurry. The huge and luxurious door opened with a loud bang. Duque strode in. The scene in front of him made Duque a little stunned. The inside was more like a semicircular theater, and the position at the front was obviously for the true god. As a newly ascended demigod, Duque could only be at the outermost circle. Duque didn't mind. Following the guidance of his soul, he found an empty position. He wasn't surprised that such a large temple was empty, because he saw a huge illusory existence next to his position. It was an existence that seemed both real and fake, as if it was pretending to sleep, but it also seemed like it was really sleeping. Even in this life, Duque didn't directly come into contact with it, but he could still recognize it from its green appearance. It was the demigod Cinereus, who should have been killed by Grandpa Roar. Duque frowned slightly. He walked around the huge Cinereus, and when he came to his position, an elemental throne with 6 colors rose naturally and lifted Duque's body onto the throne. At the same time, Duque saw his name in a daze. It was like a pen sticker used by primary school students. It was an empty name with only a hook and no meaning. It floated not far from Duque's chest. Duque pointed his finger, and the 6 elements automatically condensed on his finger according to the proportion. Duque used his finger as a pen and wrote his name in a flamboyant manner. The illusory frame absorbed Duque's name like soil absorbing rainwater. In his spiritual vision, Duque could feel the magic power in his body disappearing at the speed of a river. At the same time, with the magic power stirring, it seemed to have become a chaotic mass with 6 colors in his spiritual sea. It was very unclear. Gradually, slowly, Duque could tell that it was the divinity he had absorbed into his body. Under the washing of the high-purity magic power, the 6 types of divinity merged into one and bloomed with the light of life. The chaos was constantly washed away, and the divinity in his perception became clearer. The mark of the previous owner in the divinity separated at this time and attached a new soul name. Blue arcane magic, red flames, white frost, golden holiness, black shadows, purple thunder. The 6 colors blended and quickly formed a rainbow. Following the movements of Duque's hands, it was shaped and fixed in Duque's soul. This was Duque engraving his name in the core of the world. It was also Duque shaping his demigod soul, a super strong soul that was far superior to ordinary souls. Duque's magic power and soul power continued to be consumed at a high speed at this time. If it was an ordinary demigod who did not have enough accumulation, They might run out of power and then be destroyed on the way to becoming a demigod. But Duque was not an ordinary demigod. Since he had chosen a more complex divinity structure, he also had a wider source of divine power. He could even clearly feel that on the 2 continents of the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor, countless mages, priests, druids, and shamans were supporting him faintly, using their overflowing magic to quietly replenish Duque's consumption. Similarly, in the fire elemental world and the water elemental world, there was also a good amount of magic replenishment. Of course, as the core arcane magic, Duque could only rely on Karazhan's reserves. That was the overflowing energy from the void and other spaces that Karazhan had accumulated for countless years. Suddenly, Duque saw a vague figure. Although it was vague, he still recognized who it was at a glance. Medivh. Chapter 1306. That's right. It was Medivh. Medivh, who was supposed to live a happy retirement after the 3rd battle of the Dark Portal, made a move at this time. It was a powerful force hidden at the bottom of Karazhan that even Duque did not perceive. Duque was a little taken aback. If old Max wanted to trick him, he could blow up his lair in minutes and he wouldn't have a place to cry. Fortunately, Duque was the inheritor who truly inherited Medivh's aspirations and legacy. Well done. But don't waste your power. The higher your starting point for becoming a demigod, the greater your chance of becoming a true god. Across the void, Medivh's voice reached the depths of Duque's soul. Yes. Duque nodded heavily. In this world, there were many extraordinary people. For example, before transmigrating, there were people who could complete 1-micron level polishing. There were people who could complete electric welding that even the most sophisticated welders could not. That was both the craftsmanship of the great nation's craftsmen and the display of the limits of the human body. With the help of the system elf, Duque's fine control of magic made it so that not a trace of magic was wasted. The magic passed through the soul shell, converged, condensed, and then refined. One could see the divinity condensing at high speed, forming the form Duque wanted. Before this, Duque, who had read countless ancient books and visited Aegwin, learned that every demigod had to condense their own divinity symbol. This symbol was both the symbol of a demigod and the source of his core power. The animal-type demigod was very simple. Its symbol was himself, and at most it could strengthen a certain part. For example, the god of boars strengthened his pair of fangs. But Duque was working towards the position of the god of mages, and it would be a bit of a waste to have a human form that looked exactly like himself. The divinity symbol could be used to do more things. After thinking hard for a long time, Duque made his decision. At this moment, Duque did not hesitate. The divinity symbol began to appear. First it was a line, then countless parallel lines, and then branches intersected with each other, forming nodes, turning into a huge web. At first glance, Duque looked like a spider weaving a web. However, that was not the case. Because if someone were to observe carefully, they would discover that there was something like a broadcast tower at each node, sending out magical fluctuations. What Duque did was to cover the entire planet Azeroth with his net. With Duque's current strength, it was actually quite strenuous. Therefore, Duque avoided the important and focused on the trivial. He established the thickest network and the most powerful signal devices in every alliance or horde main city in the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor continent. That's right. What Duque was going to do was to build a magic internet, and every node would be a super large router that would spread his network wirelessly like a Wi-Fi signal. The weave is a good thing. More brainless operation, faster speed, and less mana consumption. The price he paid was just the free magic power that Pharaoh gave him when he wasn't using magic. Do you want to get on the weave? Sure, please enter your Wi-Fi password. Great Duque spell. Duque big magic stick. Demigod Duque great magic stick. It seemed that Duque was definitely a saint. Since ancient times, there had never been someone with such a conscience. In fact, Duque was very unscrupulous. This was like a bank helping customers save money and giving them a current interest of 1%. Then, if anyone wanted a loan, 8% would be the minimum. This was not Duque being unscrupulous. His honest and reliable little husband had explained it. Ordinary borrowing of magic power was not a problem. He could use the magic power that he saved daily. What if he needed to overdraw? The interest was higher, and it was daily interest. The consequences of not paying back money owed to the bank were very serious. In a society governed by law, the most they could do was to blacklist you and forbid you from spending too much. Okay? Sorry. Even if he died, he would have to pay the debt. If he really died, even his soul would have to work for Duque. Cuff cuff. At this moment, not a single pharaoh had realized how kind Duque's unscrupulous work was. When Duque spread the magic network across the 2 continents, Duque finally stepped onto the ladder of demigods. Duque's soul returned to his brand new body and slowly opened his eyes. The awakened Duque's black eyes shone with the light of new life. In the name of Duke Marcus, I announce the establishment of the magic network. The voice was not loud, but it reverberated throughout the entire magic world like thunder. The ones who heard it the most were naturally the mages, followed by the priests, and finally the warlocks, shamans, druids, and holy knights. The entire fire and water elemental world, along with the arcane energy that reverberated in the starry sky outside the Azeroth atmosphere, injected magic power into the magic network that covered the 2 continents. The trembling of the elemental sea had turned into a roar at this moment. This low and novel sound resonated thousands of times, as if it was tempting every spellcaster to try it. The first pharaoh to try the crab appeared. In the Dalajan shooting range, a Morning Star wizard shouted, "I once trained under Lord Marcus. Though he never took me in as a direct disciple, he definitely wouldn't cheat me." With that, he raised his magic staff and chanted an incantation. To be honest, those who hung out often knew each other's capabilities. The onlookers were astonished to see that the power of this fellow's pyroblast had increased by more than 30%. Originally, it could only hit a magic target halfway, but now it was sent flying. Wow, that's amazing! New things were often more difficult to implement. Duque had originally considered this point, which was why he had given such a huge discount. Who knew that while ideals were beautiful, reality was cruel. It was not that no one used it, nor was it that no one was willing to pay. It was just that too many people used it, and the mana in the magic network could not keep up. Damn. Duque cursed, hurriedly drawing in more mana from the 2 major elemental realms. The water elemental realm was still fine. The great water elemental lord, Neptulin, had died in the War of Domination and had yet to be revived. However, the boss of the fire elemental realm, Ragnaros, was still here. Even though he had been in a state of deep sleep to recover, he had long since been woken up by Duque. Faced with Duque, who had announced that he would raid his home and still had the audacity to ask for mana from his lair, Ragnaros immediately shouted in the fire elemental language. There was no need to translate those vulgar words that would lead children astray. In any case, the general gist of it was, "Uncle can bear it, Aunt can't bear it. You Duque whatever." The fire elemental mana was stuck, and Duque almost died on the spot. As a demigod, he did not have the ability to absorb mana from the fire elemental realm. Seeing that the fire elemental mana in the weave was about to be exhausted, the unscrupulous merchant Duque made up his mind and used his ultimate move. The final explanation belongs to the master of the weave, the demigod Duke Marcus. Chapter 1307. To celebrate the opening of the weave. The first 10 spellcasters to be bound to the weave will receive a supreme gift pack. Regardless of their rank, they will enjoy a 50% discount on magic power for 10 years, and 3 additional metamagic specializations for each element. The first 100 to be bound to the weave will receive a golden gift pack. The first 1,000 to be bound to the weave will receive a silver gift pack. Anyone who is bound to the weave will receive a beginner's gift pack, which can be stacked with the previous packs. Spellcasters of the Alliance will enjoy an additional 95% discount on magic power consumption. Those of Stormwind nationality will enjoy an additional 88% discount on magic power consumption. In reality, after the first 1,000, the weave's mana would basically be balanced, and Duque would not need to dig Peter to pay Paul. Not to mention those at the back, Even those at the front would not necessarily be able to take advantage of Duque. It was just like how the so-called local handicrafts in Duze's previous world were all from Iwu. It would be foolish to buy them at a 50% discount, but he would still make a profit even if he gave them a 10% discount. On the surface, Duque seemed to be selling them at a huge discount. There were so many tricks that even Duque's little conscience felt apologetic. For example, an ordinary sky wizard would need 50 units of mana to cast a beginner fireball. In reality, to achieve the same effect, they did not need that much. Magic education in this era was actually very primitive. One pharaoh had found a more feasible path, and then taught it by example. A large number of people knew how to use it, and it became a classic. Coupled with the fact that pharaoh with a bit of a brain chose the wrong talent and ran off to do all sorts of research, very few pharaoh cared about the efficiency of basic magic and whether it could be improved. If your fireball can't kill your enemy, it's because your fireball isn't big enough, it's not fierce enough. 90% of the mentors said this. This was because the fireball would dissipate very quickly once it left the mage's control. To throw it 30 yards away and still maintain its power when it hit someone, they would only focus on gathering the fire elements and ignore the other problems. Duque was different. In the past, the Dalajan was under Antonida's control, so naturally, he had no room to interfere. After Ronin became the chairman of Kirin Tor, Duque was so busy that he had no time to care about the mages. Now that Duque was going to become the god of mages, even if he was only a demigod, he had the obligation to seduce, oh no, to correct the mistakes of those newbie mages. First, the magic model. In the past, those fellows had used messy models, and Duque looked down on them. If they wanted to use the weave, they had to use his model. If someone had the ability to remove the halo of divinity from the weave and study it carefully, they would discover that the fire magic and ice magic were filled with fluid dynamics applications. All magic shot out has experienced a similar flat nozzle contraction process, like a water gun. Next was the predetermined firing trajectory. In the past, the spells would be thrown out in a straight line, and they wouldn't care where they flew halfway. It was a good thing if he could hit it, but if he couldn't, he could only blame it on his bad luck. Accuracy was not a consideration, it was all about quantity. This was also why the mages had to form teams of mages to be more powerful. Because blindly and randomly shooting, no matter how reckless the enemy was, they would be blasted to pieces. Now, Duque paid attention to the firing trajectory of magic. Any flow of fire or ice magic was actually a process of heat change and transfer. If a little more magic was used in advance to disperse the heat or cold air between oneself and the target, then according to the laws of thermodynamics, heat could spontaneously transfer from a hot object to a cold object, but it could not spontaneously transfer from a low-temperature object to a high-temperature object. This allowed fireballs and ice arrows to follow the predetermined trajectory to attack the target. According to the knowledge that Duque had learned in university and the theory of Azeroth magic, with the final optimization by the system genie, what was obtained was the explosive, magically modified version of the weave magic. While he was busy breaking through to the demigod level, the allied army was not idle. With the support of Tyrant's true Starfall, they had a plan and step-by-step to sweep Silithus clean. After using up the wreckage of the void battleships that could be smashed down from the atmosphere, they finally completely destroyed the 3 insect nests of Ash, Leg, and Zora. Under the cover of the flying fortress Naxxramas, the allied army began to slowly advance in the direction of the ancient city of An-Karaj. In the War of the Shifting Sands, it was the dragons who obtained air superiority for the Night Elves. They used their powerful breath and unstoppable strength to reap the lives of the Karaj insect people. In this life, when most of the dragons were tied up in the void battlefield, it was the terrifying cannons of the flying fortress that cleaned up all the insect people of a large scale. The exploding type, 3 bombs easily cleared up large areas of the airspace. The high explosive bombs mercilessly plowed the ground. 1,000 years ago, the night elves under Fandrel's command practically braved the rain of insect corpses to advance. Today, 1,000 years later, the ones opening the way were steam tanks equipped with anti-sand filters. They used the huge engines with shovels to open a bloody path for the Allied army. Because the largest insect nest had been completely destroyed, the Allied army didn't spend much effort to reach the wall of beetles. The wall of beetles outside of Karaj had continuously spewed out swarms of insects during the War of the Shifting Sands 1,000 years ago, almost destroying all of Kalimdor. This time, thanks to Duque letting Naxxramas fall from Karaj and removing the other insect nests first, there weren't many insects left on the beetle platform in front of the wall of beetles. But everyone knew that in time, when the ancient god of Karaj, Thun, regained his breath, the swarm of insects would once again rush out at an extremely high density and speed. At that time, any formation, any defense would be completely destroyed. To clean up this situation, they had to open the wall of beetles again, kill their way into Karaj, and completely get rid of Thun. The night elf priestess Hiloma held the quicksand staff in her hand. 1,000 years ago, because Fandral Stagelm's son died, the furious Fandral smashed the quicksand staff and cut off his connection with the dragons. But this time, with the united efforts of the Allied army, the staff was reforged. Hiloma explained at the end, the wall of beetles must be opened again. The seal from before was already incomplete. After General Marcus smashed Naxxramas into Karaj, the seal was already on the verge of collapse. No need to say more, we all understand. Sar nodded. On the other side, Magni swung the Balrog hammer, looking eager to give it a try. Behind him, other than Duque and the missing Ronin and the rest, stood all the powerhouses of the Alliance, including William. A few days ago, the team led by William finally killed the evil god hacker in Zul Gurub, and then the entire team teleported over to meet up with the main army. Chapter 1308. Clang! The quicksand staff struck a huge gong, and with the deafening sound of the gong, the 10-story wall of beetles suddenly opened the largest door. The next moment, an endless swarm of beetles surged out and attacked the Allied army's formation at the city gate. It was like a huge wave crashing against a stone embankment. Even if they were prepared, all the Allied army could do here was maintain the battle line. Any attempt to advance further was impossible. It was supposed to be like this: fire the cannons, blast them. Naxxramas' new chief commander, Bulang Bronzebeard, shouted. The entire stronghold shone from bottom to top. That was the light of the cannons. For a normal warship, it was already impressive to have a 3-story cannon hold. Naxxramas had broken this limit. From bottom to top, after modifications, there were a total of 18 stories. The top and bottom 8 stories were all 155mm cannons and below. The middle 6 stories were all kinds of crazy things. Super large mortars, cannons that were originally at the level of railway guns, and even stronghold cannons. The super cannons that were originally abandoned by the dwarves because they were too difficult to transport, or because they were not very practical, were now all pulled out by Magni's orders. It was not easy to get such a big treasure like Naxxramas, and as a moving stronghold with a main city-level portal. Other than Elusia's insistence on Duque's order, which forbade the master craftsman Gerban from installing laboratories in the stronghold, the dwarves and gnomes had installed all the crazy things in it. In the end, within a month, Naxxramas had become such a ferocious existence. 2,000 cannons of various calibers, the target was more than 5,000. There were already 36 wizard towers, 108 under construction. The final target was 256. Among them, there were 36 wizard towers for Radiant Moon mages to oversee, and 3 for Breaking Dawn mages. Even if there were only 2,000 cannons, there were only 500 on each of the 4 sides. Its power was definitely at a level that could destroy heaven and earth. Fire the cannons, fire the cannons. Bu Lang was inexplicably excited. Unlike his 2 elder brothers, although he could also use God's Descent, it was not strong. Bu Lang's talent was basically focused on long-range weapons. After careful study, he even proposed the idea of transforming Naxxramas into a multifaceted fortress. This way, no matter which direction the enemy attacked the stronghold from, they would receive a more 3-dimensional counterattack. Now, under the bombardment of the cannons, Tons of Karaji bugmen were blown into the sky and turned into dregs. They fell to the ground like heavy rain, forming a thick mountain of bug corpses. Bu Lang frowned and gave the second order. All mortars will drop incendiary bombs. A few minutes later, the entire wall of beetles had turned into a fiery purgatory. Fortunately, the direction of the wind was from north to south. Otherwise, the burnt smell of the insect carcasses would definitely make people unable to eat any meat for a few days. After half a day of bombardment, it seemed that the Keela insect troops also knew that they were no match for the Allied forces in the wilderness, and a large number of insects retreated. "Advance!" Bu Lang ordered. But soon, a warning came from the fortress control system. "DD. Warning! Warning! There is an unknown gravitational field ahead. Naxxramas is in danger of crashing again if forced to advance." Apart from Duque, no one understood how this system warning came about. They could only speculate that Thun seemed to be up to something. "Big brother, do we force an attack?" Bu Lang asked. Magni slapped his third brother's horned helmet. "Idiot! Thun is an ancient god after all. The Alliance worked so hard to get a floating fortress, it would be terrible if it fell. Next time, see if those magicians would let the Dalajan take the lead?" Yes. It was not easy to get such a powerful flying fortress. If it really fell, the Alliance's advantage would be greatly weakened. After spending a whole day, the Alliance used steam tanks and cranes to clear the passage behind the wall of beetles. There were two huge areas in front of the Allied forces. The east side was the area that had been hit by Naxxramas, and was temporarily called the Karaj ruins. There were a lot of powerful creatures detected there. The west side was the main building of the Karaj temple. "I suggest we split into two groups. Otherwise, if we all attack one group, it will only make the other group attack from the back," Sal said. Magni and the other leaders of the Alliance fell silent. It was true that the Alliance and the Horde had formed an alliance. However, in the absence of Duke, both Magni and William did not have enough power and prestige to suppress Thrall and hold absolute command in the Alliance, even though both sides had tried their best to cooperate sincerely. After thinking for a while, Magni and William looked at each other and understood each other's thoughts. A melon that was forcefully twisted would not be sweet. "Then I'll have to trouble the Horde to attack the Karaj ruins." Magni turned and said, "Your Majesty Jaina." Jaina responded, then walked in front of Sal and handed him a 30-page document. "This is the information that Commander Duke Marcus came up with after consulting a lot of historical materials about the War of the Shifting Sands and asking the Dragon and Night Elf commanders who participated in the war." Sal, Woken, and Grom's pupils instantly shrank. They were old friends. Even if they had different standpoints, Duque's information was rarely wrong when it came to the Allied forces facing a strong enemy. "General Ajax? Scar the Scarless Adrian? Thank Duque for me." Sal nodded heavily. "Please note that the records in the historical materials are not complete. These are only the parts that are recorded. For the rest, please adapt to the situation," Jaina emphasized. Of course, she knew that Duque should have detailed information about the color of the fur on the enemy leaders, but the Alliance was not obliged to provide it to the Horde. If it was the Horde in the past, Duque might have given more detailed information to preserve the strength of the Allied forces. But now, the gazes of the three Windwalker sisters were like arrows, shooting towards Sal's back with shio shio shio. Similarly, the Alliance's priests and paladins also looked over there with ugly expressions. If it weren't for the Karaj insect people and Thun, who were even more terrifying enemies, they might have been completely defeated. Sal was a little embarrassed, but he didn't regret it. From the day he recruited the Forsaken into the Horde's camp, he had foreseen this scene. The former Great Chief Orgrim and the other chiefs, plus the former Sun King Anastrian and the Silver Moon Council had all become Death Knights and Liches. It would be strange if the Alliance gave them a good attitude. That was why Sar had suggested splitting the army, and why Magni had agreed. Without Duque or Anduin Lothar, who had defeated the Horde, they really couldn't control the situation. Chapter 1309. The Alliance and the Horde split up. Thrall wasn't careless. Other than pulling the Horde's main force, he also borrowed half a division of steam tanks. Thrall simply asked for cover fire. The Alliance didn't dare to let Naxxramas go up, but it was still possible to get a tank division and 2 flying battleships. The Skybreaker was left behind, and the Flying Dutchman and Black Pearl came up. It turned out that the Allied forces were a little oversensitive. They seemed to have realized that areas outside the protection of Sea Thun's divine power were no match for the Alliance's artillery. The Kiraj Bugmen had no intention of fighting the Alliance outside. The Alliance drove all the way to the main hall of the Kiraj Temple. The moment they stepped through the door, countless Alliance soldiers felt dizzy and vomited. This is Sea Thun's evil aura? Tyron didn't look too good either. She felt that the power of the moon goddess Elun was being rejected. It wasn't that it couldn't be used at all, but if they wanted to use it, they would have to pay a higher price. Everyone below the level of a hero, leave. William waved his hand and ordered decisively. There weren't many mortals who entered. With the help of the stronger ones, they barely managed to complete the evacuation. This isn't good. If only the hero squad can enter, it'll be troublesome if we get surrounded. Magni took off his helmet, scratched his head, and put it back on. Jaina was the most careful. She pointed at the stairs. Look carefully. There aren't many traces of insects stepping on the stairs. If I'm not wrong, those with insufficient status aren't allowed to enter the main hall. If a large number of insects' sharp legs had pierced through the stairs countless times, no matter how hard it would be full of holes. It seemed that humans were divided into different levels, and so were insects. Along the way, it wasn't just ordinary insects that attacked them, but powerful monsters. The 10-story tall monster, the Anubisath Defender, looked like a typical Egyptian dog-headed giant. Not only did it leave a deep impression with its heavy punches, it would also self-destruct after dying. If not for Duque's strategy, people would have died in minutes. The Obsidian Cleanser, which looked a little like a sphinx and had a purplish-black body, could release disgusting energy shockwaves and mindlessly blow people up. When the Alliance's hero squad slowly advanced in front of the Prophet Skirim, everyone carefully looked through the strategy left behind by Duque. They needed a total of 3 warriors. There weren't many warriors who had stepped into the realm of heroes these days. When Anduin Lothar was still around, all he could see were warriors. Ever since there were paladins who could fight, tank, and heal, most of the Alliance's melee classes went to become paladins. Back then, the 5 Silver Saints were all warriors. When asked if Gavin Rad and the others could turn back, he said that he was used to it and that it was not good to turn back. He had no choice but to let Bu Lang Bronzebeard run back to make a cameo. Bu Lang put down his beloved shotgun, picked up his axe and shield, and used charge. He looked pretty decent. Just like that, the eldest and 3rd brother of the Bronzebeard family, as well as William, barely made up 3 warrior tanks to tank the boss. As the number 1 in the Kiraj Divine Temple, Prophet Skirim's fighting style wasn't too disgusting. Anyone who could beat Majordomo in the Molten Core should be able to deal with him. In theory, this boss with a lower body like a spider, upper body like a steamed lobster, and a cockroach hanging on its chest shouldn't be difficult to deal with. The problem was that the leader of the Kiraj Divine Temple wasn't stupid. If he were to stand guard one by one, wouldn't he be waiting for the boss to come and kill him? It was as if he had poked a hornet's nest. Almost as soon as Magni rushed up to fight Skirim, an evil energy wave suddenly spread out from the ground. The range of this wave was so wide that it almost covered an area the size of at least 10 football fields in front of and behind the main gate of the temple. Without any warning, the ground within this area collapsed. The majestic main hall of the Kiraj Divine Temple, along with the huge dome that was the size of a battleship, the thick stone pillars that required 5 people to wrap their arms around, and the exquisite and beautiful hard floor tiles all collapsed. This was so big that it left all the Alliance powerhouses speechless. None of the Alliance powerhouses knew how to fly. As the debris fell like rain, everyone screamed and fell. Watch my pseudo-levitation spell. Gavin Rad reacted immediately. He waved his wind sword, and the strong wind from the divine artifact sword blew under everyone's feet. It slightly supported everyone and slowed down their falling speed. In theory, they wouldn't die from the fall, but a new problem arose. Everyone's falling speed slowed down, but the huge rocks above them were still falling at the same speed. For everyone who couldn't dodge in midair, this meant heavy casualties. Attack! The Windrunner sisters were the first to react. The three sisters suddenly twisted their bodies and changed their posture to be upside down so that it was easier to shoot with their bows. The arrows mixed with the power of wind and lightning rushed up and smashed the rocks above them. While the Windrunner sisters were covering them, everyone else started to summon their flying mounts, pureblood fire eagles. Bright flames flew out of everyone's hands and turned into a huge fire eagle in the blink of an eye. Only when the fire hawks carried the heroes did the situation change a little. There's something down there. Sasha's eyes were the sharpest. Half a second later, she shouted, "Enemy!" It's a family of three and the leader of the sludge. A family of three was the abbreviation of Lord Carey, Princess Yodge, and Vim. They were the leaders of the three gigantic insects of different sizes and colors. The leader that looked like a sludge monster was the aberration monster, Vistus. "Don't go down, it's a trap." William was the first to react. Don't act according to the enemy's plan. This was the instinct of a commander. Just as everyone was about to fly up on their pureblood fire eagles, an ear-piercing buzzing sound came from afar. Everyone was familiar with this sound. It was the buzzing sound of bees flying. The problem was, where did such a huge bee come from? The first to rush out of the darkness and enter the vision of the Alliance powerhouses was a huge green insect. There were many red spots on her wings. Princess Huron. Aurelia turned pale with fright. Most of the people were suspended in midair. Aerial battles weren't something that mortals were good at. Even if everyone had a pureblood fire eagle to carry them, it still wouldn't work. No one believed that a pureblood fire eagle that was only slightly stronger than a griffin would be a match for a flying insect like Princess Huron. Oh, do I have to do it after all? There was only one person who didn't summon a pureblood fire eagle despite being supported by Gavinrad's Gale, Countess Katrana. In fact, even if she was left alone, she wouldn't fall to her death. This was because she was the famous Black Dragon Princess, Xianxia. Chapter 13:10. Xianxia let out a long howl, and a pair of black wings grew out of her bare back. Her four limbs turned into sharp claws in the blink of an eye, and her smooth and tender skin was instantly covered with dense and solid scales. Her reddish-black robe instantly turned into rags, revealing her colossal dragon body. A meteor hammer-like tail also grew out of her buttocks. In just a breath's time, she had already completely taken on the form of a colossal dragon. Under the surprised gazes of the Alliance heroes, this colossal black dragon was rapidly growing in size and fearlessly charging forward. "Well done!" Varian exclaimed happily. Originally, William did not have a good impression of Xianxia, the evil black dragon who had caused him so much trouble last year, caused him to split into two, and even almost gave up the right to rule Stormwind City. If the person who claimed to have subdued her wasn't Duke Marcus, whom he respected, he would have immediately turned hostile and forced the other party to execute this black dragon. Evil must be eradicated. His ghost wolf personality drove him to do so. But now, everyone, including William, was extremely glad that the Alliance had Xianxia, a powerful colossal dragon who didn't belong to the Dragon Slumber Shrine, to help them. Without her, the Alliance heroes would probably be beaten up. "Let's fly up." "We can't let Magni be up there alone," William shouted. Under his command, the powerhouses all controlled the fire eagles to dodge the falling rocks and fly up. Woo! At this moment, another existence rushed out of the darkness at high speed. From afar, it looked like a little elf soaring among the flowers. She had the appearance of a human and two pairs of transparent cicada wings. She was covered with a white veil and wore a low-cut evening gown that bound her breasts. Didn't she look very beautiful? Apart from the two horn-like giant bugs on her shoulders, the green claws that were curled up, and the pair of feet, claws, that only had 3 fingers. If that was the case, she was indeed a beauty. The problem was that everyone in the Alliance knew that she was the leader of Encourage Sartura. She used a brainless whirlwind slash right from the start. The formless wind blades easily covered the entire upper floor. She did not participate in the battle between Black Dragon and Princess Huhuran at all. She even took the initiative to avoid the battle. Knowing that the wind blades of Whirlwind Slash would not be able to hit the pure-blooded Firehawk in the distance, she only did one thing: block the entire airspace, forbidding the Alliance from flying up. Not only her, but more Courage insect people flew over. They took the risk of being killed by falling rocks and sealed off the entire airspace. William's facial muscles kept twitching as he looked at the sealed airspace again. Finally, he squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. "Let's go down. Don't separate." That's right. He had no choice but to go down. Be it Magni or Onyxia, they were both people who could hold on for a long time on their own. He could only wish them luck. After he made up his mind, the things he had to do became much clearer. At first glance, this was a huge cave with a depth of more than a kilometer. In the vast dark space, there were plenty of places for the flying insects to soar and attack back and forth. Outside, they could have the support of the Alliance's cannons. However, in this cave, there were leader-level insects on the ground, and they had to be wary of the enemies that swooped down from time to time. Needless to say, annihilation was the only outcome. "We have to find cover," William shouted. "There." Queen Sylvanas raised her hand, and a lightning arrow shot over. Along with the lightning, everyone saw that it was a huge hole in midair. The hole was about 2 stories high, and could allow 4 carriages to pass through side by side. However, for the current situation where there were enemies all around, it was already the best place to hide. No matter how bad it was better than directly falling into the mouths of a family of 3. It was at this moment that Sartura swooped down. As she swept past, she activated a powerful whirlwind slash. The violent wind blades easily scattered the Alliance's flying formation. Brawl Bearhide's Firehawk couldn't dodge in time, and was killed by the whirlwind slash on the spot. If he hadn't instantly transformed into a giant bear with thick skin and flesh, he would probably have died as well. "Grab my hand." As the other main force of King was Iron Triangle, Valera barely managed to save Brawl. "No. We have to do something," William shouted. "Duque, help." Jaina couldn't help but shout in the weave. If possible, Duque wanted to spend more time perfecting his weave. He had never thought that his weave would have to undergo a test so soon. Spellcasters who were connected to the weave could contact it, but most of their requests would be ignored. Duque wasn't a super operator with 1,000 brains. In order to maintain the newborn weave, his system elves were almost operating at full capacity. However, this voice couldn't be ignored by Duque, because the one calling him was Jaina. "Duque, I need your magical support, the kind that can instantly annihilate thousands of flying insects." "Alright." Duque's direct reply in the weave made Jaina overjoyed. Communication through divine will was the most direct. In just half a second, Duque understood the whole story. "Damn it. Mere insects, do you think you're an eel? You even dare to touch my girl?" The entire weave was responding to its owner's anger. Apart from the flapping of the flying insect's wings, there shouldn't be too many other sounds in the void. Suddenly, it was as if the darkness would split open at any time and a sun would jump out. The rocks and sand around the fire eagle that should have been falling at a higher speed seemed to have broken free from the restraints of gravity and sputtered horizontally. A terrifying aura with great majesty rose from behind Jaina and Elucia, and the insects that were flying in the air started to cry out strangely. They screamed, wanting to get close to the 2 female spellcasters and get rid of them first. However, a formless elemental wave swept across the void. It was as if there was a pair of gigantic air palms above and below that suddenly pressed down on all the insects, causing them to hover in the air. They couldn't move up nor down, nor could they advance nor retreat. They were stuck there awkwardly, becoming pitiful live targets. In the next instant, the darkness around the 2 female spellcasters suddenly parted, and a dazzling white light lit up the entire dark cave like the first snowfall of winter. Reflected in everyone's eyes were countless rays of pure white light piercing through the vast darkness of the void. It was as if the heavenly river was flowing in reverse, attacking from below towards the sky. "Blizzard?" This was more than 1,000 top-notch frost arrows. In theory, this would require at least 1,000 radiant moon archmages at the same time, each casting for 5 seconds. However, with the support of the weave, Jaina and Lucia easily achieved this. The blooming flower of ice was like a blooming white chrysanthemum. Chapter 13:11. In midair, apart from Sartura and Princess Hurin, who was fighting fiercely at a higher altitude, every single Courage flying insect was completely torn into pieces after a sharp wind-breaking sound. Their long shins, sharp claws, and sharp mouthparts were all broken and scattered in the air. In less than half a second, they would turn into ice and fall to the ground along with the mud falling from the sky. In an instant, it was as if the entire world had become quiet. Not to mention Sartura, even Princess Hurin and her family of 3 were shocked. Inside the Karazhan, Duke spat on the ground. Tisk! The magic net was built with the main cities of the Alliance and Horde as the core nodes. In the Courage Temple, Thun had used some mysterious power to resist the magic net's coverage. The wave of Jaina's power just now was also the last wave. Right before the magic net was forcefully cut off, Duque sent a message to Jaina. "Hold on, I have to save Magni first." In reality, before the magic net was completed, Duque's advancement had already been completed. He had wanted to spend more time to build a better foundation. Unfortunately, the Allied forces would not stop advancing to wait for him. Previously, Tyrant had purposely slowed down the progress at the cost of human lives. Sometimes it was like this. When the situation was pressing, only those who could grow faster under the pressure would be able to carve out a bloody path in the face of adversity. "Khadgar, I'll go to Encourage. I'll leave the magic net to you for now," Duque instructed. "Master, the problem is that there are more and more requests to connect." Khadgar frowned. "Then inform the spellcasters who have used the magic net many times. Now that the magic net is newly built, overuse may cause a heavy burden on the spellcaster's mind and soul. Limit the number of times they can use the magic net in the first month," Duque said grandly. Khadgar bared his teeth. Although adding a usage limit was definitely a considerate measure for new spellcasters, how many people could see through the dilemma of not having enough mana in the magic net? Furthermore, if Duque were to go personally, it would probably be a huge mana overdraft. Alright. If the boss moved his lips, the lackeys would naturally have to run their legs. Khadgar and the other elemental emissaries looked at each other and saw the bitter smiles in each other's eyes. "You don't need to say anything, just get to work." Duque waved Aish, and a purplish-blue long and narrow teleportation door appeared in front of him. The meticulous Khadgar noticed that this portal was narrower than usual, giving off a sharper feeling. His eyes were not playing tricks on him. This was a portal used to break through space. Beyond Courage Divine Temple was Thun's territory. As an ancient god, of course, he wouldn't let his enemies come and go as they pleased. "You want to open a portal to enter?" "No way." It was supposed to be like this. However, the space attribute of the drumstick wasn't just for show. With the unpleasant cawing of the 3 ghost crows, Duque's spirit began to cross the void and came to the outside of the temple of Courage. What a small flaw. Originally, the Courage Divine Temple was a solid piece of land. No one would be able to open a portal to enter. Ever since the honest and reliable Duque forcefully smashed Naxxramas in and turned the large area of the Divine Temple into the ruins of Courage, a flaw had appeared in Thun's spatial defense. Even though Thun had patched up the flaw later on, it could still be considered a flaw. This was a flaw that even a normal Breaking Dawn Archmage couldn't exploit, but Duque had immediately grasped it. Duque stretched out his right hand. At the same time, outside the spatial defense layer thousands of miles away, an identical but larger arcane energy palm appeared and tore open the hole in the spatial defense layer with one hand. Without giving Thun any time to react, Duque's main body directly stepped into the portal and teleported over at high speed. On the other side, the bitter Magni was being abused. The area that he was in had already collapsed, but the problem was that before he fell, Prophet Skirum had used its 2 claws hidden under its rose-red sleeves to grab him and teleported him deeper into the divine temple. Initially, the battle was still going well. Relying on the advantage of the Balrog's hammer, Magni relied on the god's descent state and used his enlarged body to solo Prophet Skirum. Needless to say, when Magni really took out a quarter of this lobster-shaped monster boss HP, a nightmare came. Every time Skirum lost a quarter of its HP, it would create 2 doppelgangers. As long as there was no one next to the main body or the doppelganger, it would mindlessly throw spells. Things like Great Earthquake Strike, Magic Explosion, Frost Trap, and all sorts of other random spells. According to normal tactics, the 3 main tanks would pull the main body and the doppelganger, and everyone would concentrate their firepower to kill the doppelganger first. This was because the doppelganger's attack power was even higher than the main body. But now that Magni was the only one left, he immediately felt bitter. The boss had doppelgangers and they were running all over the street. He had wanted to catch one and kill it first, but in the end, it could teleport, and not to a fixed location. If it caught up, it would teleport away, and Magni was fooled. There were a few times when Magni wanted to leave and find a hole, or even dig a hole himself and fall in. But he found that the ground was extremely solid, and he was at least 1,000 meters away from the main door of the temple. He could only miserably run around with Skirum and be kited by him again and again. He knew that when the duration of his god's descent ended, it would be time for him to die in battle. Just at this moment, a mysterious purplish-blue light suddenly appeared beside Magni. That dazzling light was like the light of the birth of all things. Perhaps the life on Earth came from sunlight, and it was incompatible with the purplish-blue color. But this ball of light gave people a feeling that it was full of wisdom. At that moment, in the originally decaying temple, all the other colors dimmed. It was as if there was no other color in the world. The space suddenly trembled. A crack in space that wasn't very wide was forcefully torn open and became a slightly narrow teleportation door. A man in a blue and white magic robe walked out. Magni almost threw himself at him with tears and snot. Duke's eyelids twitched. Why did this Duke sound like it was calling him, but why did it feel like Magni was calling him father? *T. I don't have such an ugly son. Duke kicked Magni, who had rushed over to hug Magni's leg after he had dispelled God's descent. Scram! When there were comrades standing behind him that needed his protection, Magni was the most reliable warrior. He fully demonstrated what it meant by heaven to the left and warriors to the right, with his ridiculously hard body. However, in the face of a demigod like Duke, Mag actually cowered in fear. Chapter 13:12. Terrified. He was King coward. Perhaps he was trying to conserve his energy, or perhaps he felt that he had to leave a useful body for the next battle. This burly dwarf took out a tower shield from his storage bag and carried it on his back. He changed his axe to a shield in his left hand and a hammer in his right. From afar, he looked like a tortoise if he didn't have the Balrog hammer. Duke rolled his eyes and decided not to bother with this guy anymore. He spread out his spirit sense and sensed that although Jaina and the others were in a sorry state, they were fine. Duke exhaled a breath of turbid air. Phew, all right. Although I don't know who taught you to divide and annihilate, but since you're so good at it, I can't hold back. Let's deal with you quickly and meet up with the others. Suddenly, Skirum replied to Duke, Long live Thun. Duke, huh? This guy could talk? He didn't have much of an impression after fighting so many times. After all, this guy wasn't strong and hadn't been wiped out many times. But your boss Thun is already more than 10,000 years old. Are you sure you want to wish him long live? Duke laughed shamelessly and made his move. Prophet Skirum was faster than Duque. He instinctively sensed that the elemental state around Duque wasn't right, so he didn't choose to use Magic Burst. Instead, he let his main body and doppelganger release Great Earthquake Strike at the same time. Duque frowned. Skirum had obviously held back just now. When that shocking force of nature hit him, he instinctively realized that if he was in his normal state, he would definitely be sent flying by this force. No, being sent flying was already a good thing. The worst thing was to be hit by 3 great earthquake strikes at the same time. That scene would probably be like a pile driver. He would become a pillar and be driven deep into the ground. Mag was about to remind Duque to be careful. However, he saw that Duque did not make any extra movements. He just pressed one hand into the void, and suddenly, a faint sound of wind whistling and thunder rumbling rang out. He didn't make any big movements. It was as if he was flipping a page in a book. It was very natural. In that instant, it was as if Duque's hand had grasped the power of the entire world. It was as if the entire cycle of life and death was within his grasp. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The natural elemental shockwave that should have punched a few large holes in Duque's seemingly thin body instantly disintegrated and dissipated with this action of Duque's. No! Prophet Skirum shouted. In the blink of an eye, the radiance of the arcane technique lit up, and 3 identical Skirums appeared beside Duque in a triangular formation, firmly surrounding him. The 3 Skirums, whose upper bodies resembled lobsters, had fanatical expressions on their faces as they raised their claws in unison and shouted, "Go to hell!" The purple radiance of magic burst immediately lit up on the main body and the 2 doppelgangers. Duque laughed shamelessly. Sure enough, monsters are monsters? Or is it that those who aren't in human form have lower intelligence? Bang! Bang! The arcane energy explosion that enveloped Skirum's body suddenly stopped. The purplish-blue radiance on the 3 guys' bodies all rushed out uncontrollably and condensed into hundreds of arcane missiles in midair. In an instant, they shot back at their own bodies. Then Mag heard bang, bang. 2 shattering sounds rang out, and the 2 boss doppelgangers that had been bothering him for a long time exploded. Impossible! Skirum shouted. Impossible? Duque smiled. Idiot! Let me tell you, if I can't enter the divine domain as the god of magic, then I will settle for the next best thing, and become a god as the god of arcane magic. After teasing for a while, Duque didn't waste any more words and directly pointed at the index and middle fingers of his right hand. Chirp! A sound rang out. Duque's fingers seemed to extend infinitely. Of course, it wasn't that Duque's fingers became longer, but the arcane energy instantly shot out from his fingertips. It was hard to describe whether it was an arcane missile or an arcane sword. The arcane elemental light that shot out was incredibly fast, and in less than 1/100th of a second, it pierced Skirum's throat. It was clearly magic, but it was no less cold than any divine sword in the world. This was both magic and a long sword condensed from magic. The sword light was full of killing intent, and the momentum of the sword could pierce through any hard shell that wasn't protected by divinity. Clang! At the moment when Duque's long arcane sword pierced Skirum's throat, Skirum, who was a general under sea, Thun, finally reacted at the critical moment. The huge red pauldrons, no, it should be a part of its body, the hard shell on the left and right shoulders, suddenly closed. The solid shell locked the incoming sword edge, so that the long arcane sword couldn't move an inch. Duque's 2 fingers bent slightly, and then poked out again. Obviously, Duque didn't reveal any emotion, but Magni, who was next to him, had a completely different feeling. He seemed to hear the sound of a sword resounding through the world, and a terrifying killing intent surged. The pure arcane energy burst out like a flood. Duque's calmness formed a sharp contrast with Skirum's and Magni's nervousness. Clang! The long sword that seemed to have been locked a moment ago became 2 sharper arcane daggers in the next instant. This time, the hard shell couldn't stop it anymore, and the 2 more agile energy daggers pierced through with unparalleled force. There was no time to dodge, let alone block. There was only a "pu" sound, and the 2 daggers pierced Skirum's throat in an instant. There were no more 50% and 25% clones left. The arcane energy that rushed into Prophet Skirum's body destroyed it like lightning, and sucked away all of its life force in one breath. Skirum's huge body, which weighed several tons, collapsed with a loud bang. Magni was dumbfounded. Duque, that's it? Duque's eyes rolled back. How long do you want to fight? I'm a demigod now after all. To deal with a leader-level creature that doesn't even have divinity, do I have to fight for a day and a night before I barely win? Are all demigods so awesome? Alright, I'll become a demigod too. Duque ruthlessly attacked Magni. Let's wait until you become a legendary hero first. Legendary heroes weren't a real level. It was purely to distinguish the powerhouses who had stepped into the realm of heroes from the powerhouses who were infinitely close to the realm of demigods. It was a level that adventurers boasted about themselves. Chapter 1313. But the rank of legendary heroes seemed to be solidifying recently. It couldn't be helped. According to the realm of heroes, the newly promoted Valilla, Brawl, and the earlier batch of Riadaline and Lillis were all heroes. But the difference in strength between them and the oldest batch of heroes was too great. Not to mention Tyrion Fordring, the most senior Empress Dowager, even Vanessa could easily defeat Vale Era. After all, Vanessa's strength was honed through countless bloody battles. Compared to Vale Era, who could only bully mortal gladiators in the arena or beat up small monsters, it was a completely different concept. If Vanessa hadn't been so busy recently, Valilla would have chased after Vanessa every day to ask for a duel. The same thing happened to Riadaline. She was already the most powerful paladin among the Blood Elves. Even without divine equipment, Gavin Rad still relied on the more intense holy light to take down Riadaline with one hand. And in the tavern, in the comments of the upper echelons, heroes who had experienced so many battles were unknowingly promoted to the new rank of legendary heroes. Naturally, there was a new standard for legendary heroes. Only those who could take down a divine creature alone could be considered a legendary hero. Hearing Duque's words, Magni bared his teeth. Good. There are too many things to do now. The Iron Furnace Castle needs a powerful guardian. I'll go train after defeating Thun. Duque stretched out his hand. He had wanted to take Prophet Skirum's spoils of war and leave, but the system elf suddenly gave him a notification. The soul of this creature has been detected to be compatible with the magic net. Would you like to capture it? If captured, there is a 94% chance that it can be converted into a magic net processor after purification. What kind of benefit is this? Looking at the system notification carefully, Duque decisively clicked yes. He only saw Duque's right hand pinch the air, and then a translucent spirit of Skirum was pulled out of the body by Duque. Nimble fingers flew in the air, and then Skirum's soul was shredded like a butcher dismembering an ox. The extra spider legs, shoulder armor, and arms were all cut off and shattered in the void, leaving only a purple-blue soul core, which was finally taken by Duque's palm. The corners of Duque's mouth rose, and he suddenly smiled bitterly. Because he found that what he was doing now was almost the same as what Jaden had done to Nizul back then. However, the egg always destroyed Nizul's body and stuffed it into an ice skeleton. Duque was a bit more thorough. He completely erased Skirum's soul imprint, which meant that the miserable Skirum would no longer have any memories and would only be left with the instincts of a caster. Duque had received a system notification the moment he'd brought Cram to the weave. Arcane Soul Compatibility Test complete. The weave has obtained a new metamagic ability, Enhanced Magic Blast. This ability can increase the critical hit rate of Magic Blast by 10%. Holy sh*t. There's actually such a suffocating operation? Come to think of it, it made sense. Skirum had always used teleportation and Magic Blast to blast his enemies until they wished they were dead. It wasn't surprising that his soul had the ability to enhance Magic Blast. Originally, Duque had no interest in small bosses other than Thun, but now it was completely different. This was a great opportunity to collect metamagic abilities. Ever since he'd opened the weave, Duque had suffered enough. There was no other reason, it was because he didn't earn much. It was different from what he'd imagined. Simply saving mana would not bring more benefits to Duque, but providing metamagic abilities, which were more profitable value-added services, would allow Duque to fill his pockets. At this moment, Duque felt that his hobby of collecting had awakened. In the underground cave thousands of meters away, Jaina and Alicia's sudden outburst had only slightly improved the situation of the hero group. Without the entanglement of the small monsters, the hero group faced the fierce attack of Sartura again. After the weave was forcefully expelled by Thun's power, the hero group had lost a more effective way to fight back. Under the attacks of Sartura, who charged at them like a brainless whirlwind, the team members were forced to split into two groups. One group successfully charged into the hole in midair, while the other group had to land on the ground to face the family of three. The family of three and Sartura's combination was indeed terrifying, but it wasn't much better for them to charge into the hole, because there was another boss guarding the hole. It was the fourth boss of Karaj, the tenacious Fancaris. It had 6 legs and a trident tail. It had bright yellow skin and red stripes, and it was a commander-tier monster with the body of a scorpion. Fancaris's fighting style was quite irritating. It would constantly summon small insects and even elite sandworms to cause trouble. And it had a strong attack that could tear apart the highest-level epic armor of this era. The most disgusting thing was its teleportation. It would occasionally teleport a team member into its nest, and they couldn't do anything but take the beating of the small insects without struggling. Of course, Fancaris's problem was child's play compared to the danger below. It wasn't just the family of three. Even the leader of the ooze monsters, Vistus, had come out. This meant that the team below had to endure the crazy attacks of 5 bosses at the same time. It was obvious that there was a commander behind the scenes directing these leaders to perfectly divide and eliminate the Alliance heroes. Damn it. Goo. Gavin Rad was the first to suffer. When he was the first to land on his fire eagle, he was also the first to be ambushed. The leader of the ooze monsters, Vistus, suddenly jumped out from under the sand and swallowed Gavin Rad along with his fire eagle. Gavin Rad activated his invincibility almost immediately. So what? The Paladin's Holy Shield spell only lasted for slightly more than 10 seconds. Once the time was up, Gavin Rad felt like he was drowning in the corrosive mucus. If it wasn't for the fact that his entire body was filled with holy light, and the wind sword's nature attribute slightly resisted the corrosive mucus, Gavin Rad would probably have been the first to die in this battle. The scales of victory for the Alliance were still tipping in the direction of collapse. William led his men into the cave and faced Fancaris head-on. Magni stayed on the surface, and only Bu Lang and Theon were left to tank the boss. Due to the need of battle tactics, Riadaline had come down wearing an armor that strengthened the Holy Light spell, and she couldn't change it in time. Be careful! Before Theon could finish his sentence, Sartura had already swooped down for the kill. The claws on her 2 legs stretched out. Since she didn't manage to hook the more agile Queen Sylvia, she flapped her wings and suddenly changed her target, grabbing Kalia who was beside her. She wanted to tear Kalia in half in midair. Just then, a teleportation door appeared out of nowhere in the air behind her. Chapter 13-14. This portal that appeared in the air 50 meters in the air was not visible at all if one was not a ranger hero with the sharpest eyes. But the timing of the portal's appearance could be said to be perfect. It was the moment when Sartura raised her white veil and revealed a cruel smile as she flew. Suddenly, Sartura's smile froze on her face. The portal that appeared out of nowhere seemed to have been forcibly torn open by the fingers of countless pure white mage hands. In the purple-blue rift, a golden spiral sword suddenly stabbed out. It was the golden light that seemed like the birth of all things. It was the light of the first glimmer of dawn. It represented hope and the banishment of evil darkness. It was impossible to avoid. Sartura, who was flying at high speed, could not avoid it at all. Accompanied by a scream, even if she twisted her body at the last moment, at least 2 of Sartura's cicada wings were cut off by the golden sword. She still wanted to pull Kalia away, but after cutting off her wings, the spiral sword's momentum suddenly changed, drawing a beautiful arc in the air. If she did not let go of her claws, her legs would not be able to move. In the choice of tearing apart an insignificant human or saving her legs, Sartura was decisively terrified. She did not even have time to increase her strength to hurt Kalia, and directly let go of her claws. Kalia screamed, and a second later, she fell into an incomparably warm and familiar embrace. Is that you? Is it really you? once again narrowly escaping death. Looking at Duque's familiar yet somewhat unfamiliar face, Kalia's tears easily broke the dam. She stroked Duque's face, completely unable to control herself, and began to cry. Duque gently carried Kalia in a princess hug. It was only at this moment that the spatial rift behind him turned into countless drifting fragments, and finally turned into nothingness. Looking at the battered and exhausted battle situation, in the depths of Duque's dark eyes, there seemed to be a dazzling golden flame burning. He opened his mouth, and his voice shook the entire dark cave. "It's the twin emperors, right? Not a bad plan. Almost caused irreparable damage to the alliance. And almost hurt my lover. But since I'm here, then this farce should end. Get out here. Otherwise, I'll kill my way to see Thun." The buzzing in the air was a display of power, a change in the laws. The weave, which had been rejected outside the temple, once again began to crack like glass in the air. Duque showed everyone the gap between mortals and god domain experts. The first thing that entered Duque's line of sight was the sludge monster boss, Vistus, who had swallowed Gavin Rad. Gavin Rad was desperately swimming inside the ooze monster's body. Oh, it should be called struggling. Even if Gavin Rad had the strength and time to swim in there for a year, he wouldn't be able to swim out. The green mucus would surge in the opposite direction, pushing the victim back to the center. Unfortunately, Vistus was a rare monster that was immune to both soft and hard tactics. Because the ooze monster didn't have a fixed body, it couldn't take physical attacks. In essence, it wasn't an undead. What was even more ridiculous was that it couldn't even be considered an evil creature. Holy light was useless against it. In addition, it was of the nature attribute. Even the wind sword was ineffective against it. The bitter Gavin Rad was suppressed to death by it. Gavin Rad, who had experienced many battles, really wanted to kneel. Seeing Gavin Rad struggling like a nailed frog, Duque forcefully connected to Gavin Rad through the weave and communicated with him through telepathic thoughts that could transmit thousands of messages per second. "Boss, help." Gavin Rad was definitely in tears and snot. "What? You can still hold on? Then I'll save the others first." Duque was up to no good and deliberately played dumb. "Boss, you can't play me like this. I've been your guard for so long. Even if I don't have any credit, I've worked hard. Back then, you were flirting with girls in the room, and I was sitting outside, drinking and drinking." Gavin Rad's voice was already shocking to the point of tears. Alright, I won't tease you anymore. Thank you for saving my life, boss." To outsiders, the telepathic thoughts communication happened in less than 1/100th of a second. Everyone only saw Duque holding Kalia in midair and attacking. Hundreds of snow-white threads of light shot out from every finger of his free left hand. At first, they were just threads, but in the blink of an eye, they turned into the sharpest frost arrows, pouring down on Vistus' body like a torrential rain. That's right, this sludge monster leader's biggest weakness was frost. It could not be dealt with by a simple blizzard spell, but a large number of frost arrows. Only the frost arrows could easily freeze the well-hidden small cores in the sludge monster's body. If this were a game, they would have to form a large group of mage players and use a large number of frost arrows to kill this thing. Since Duque, who was a demigod and a mage demigod, was here, the other mages had nothing to do. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Suddenly, a flurry of frost arrows shot out like a snowstorm, and everyone only saw Vistus instantly freeze. The originally disgusting soft body turned into a large pile of green ice that looked like poop. In the next second, the iceberg that affected the appearance of the city cracked open with a "Gotcha." "What? Gavin Rad, am back." On his forehead, Gavin Rad, who had the color of a grassland, waved his wind sword, like a god of war who had returned from a latrine pit, bursting out of the iceberg in anger. Sally Whitemane burst out laughing. Don't blame others for looking down on him. In fact, his dignified appearance also affected the city's appearance, and it emitted an unpleasant stench. At the same time, Duque attacked again. This time, Duque directly drew on the magic power in the magic net and used the frost element to instantly create a large iceberg, forcibly separating the family of three. When Duque turned around again, Vistus happened to explode. It was like some mischievous little brat throwing 250 kilograms of firecrackers into a latrine pit and then exploding them to his heart's content. Bang! That was awesome. Many girls were already far enough away, but now they were even more respectful. However, after witnessing the changes that happened to Vistus after he exploded, they still felt like vomiting. The huge ooze monster boss suddenly turned into 20 piles. System notification: Vistus cells are proliferating wildly. If more than 1/3 of the cells are not destroyed in a single division, Vistus will be revived with full health. Duque raised his eyebrows. 1/3? In the next second, in the system annotation, the words, divine creature, almost blinded Duque's titanium dog eyes. *CK. Cursing in his heart, Duque directly attacked. Chapter 13:15. In the legends before Duque transmigrated, abominations were mutated divinity monsters that were born between normal deities. There was no such thing as abominations in the world of Azeroth, because the few ancient deities themselves had a special appearance that affected the appearance of the city. A normal human would never have thoughts like tentacle control or tentacle play. Recalling the glory of the big eyeball tentacle monster from C. Thun's memory, Duque really felt that he was doing justice on behalf of the heavens by destroying these guys. At this moment, the frost elements around Duque became thousands of times more active. Countless magic arrays appeared on the magic net nodes that extended from the void beside Duque. Sharp frost arrows took shape in an instant and surged out of the magic net, raining down on the 20 disgusting green lumps of squirming on the ground. Although Vistus's cell proliferation and blood recovery plan was awesome, the price of such a huge recovery of HP was its defense. It was completely defenseless. This was purely a gamble born of biological instinct. It was a gamble on whether the enemy's attack power could surpass its recovery ability. If the frost attack was not strong enough, Vistus was an immortal existence that could not be killed. Relying on skills such as acid spit, there would always be a time when the enemy would be exhausted to death. But if the attack was strong enough, lumps of green biological tissues were eroded by the unhindered influx of frost magic. Every green cell in its body began to crystallize. Just like people with large areas of frostbite, they often needed to amputate their limbs because all the cells in the limbs had been frozen to death. The water in the cells began to crystallize, which in turn pierced through the cell walls, causing the cells to die. The 20 lumps of Vistus clones began to freeze again. It was a kind of silent wail. Even if the bystanders could not understand it, they could easily see the green mucus tissues solidifying once again. This time, there was no more fragmentation or recovery. Almost every cell was directly filled with high-purity frost elements. They had lost their lives forever, let alone the ability to regenerate. Vistus was completely dead. Heh! A family of 3 not far away roared in unison. They were angry at Duque for killing their companion. Of course, Duque had no time to pay attention to this defeated dog's wail. He lowered his head and carefully examined the item in his hands. System notification: Host, you have obtained 2 basic units of Divinity of Chaos. Note: Divinity of Chaos, the power of the divine realm that is irregular. It can easily raise a creature's level and greatly increase its combat power, but its weakness is that it can easily cause a creature to enter a berserk state. If it was only at this level, Duque would definitely throw it away like trash. Fortunately, there was another sentence in the remark. Do you want to purify it? If the chaos elements are removed, it is estimated that 1 basic unit of Order Divinity of unknown attributes will be produced. Duque blinked. What basic unit? It's too much of a mouthful. Let's call it point instead. Alright, I want to extract 1 point of Order Divinity from 2 points of Divinity of Chaos. What's the price? The system elf replied. It is estimated that it will take 365 Azeroth days, and there is a 45% chance that the purification will fail, which in turn will bring adverse effects to the host. Duque understood what the system elf meant. Purification was actually a process of mutual influence. Although light and darkness were interchangeable in this world, nothing was completely pure. The more absolute a power was, the harder it was to purify it. System Elf, is there anything I can do to increase the success rate? If I use a greater amount of order power to purify it, the failure rate can be greatly reduced and infinitely close to zero. The communication between Duque and the System Elf's divine sense was only for a moment in the outside world, and outsiders did not even notice that Duque was in a daze. In Duque's perception, an enemy was approaching at high speed from behind. Originally, Sartura was very fast, but after she abandoned the whirlwind slash that would slow her down and added all her strength to her speed when she swooped down at high speed was quite shocking. Although many people were unwilling to admit it, it was already a little like the speed of sound. The attack arrived before the sound was heard. Unfortunately, Duque had already spread out the weave. Even if Sartura's rash charge in a straight line was faster, the elemental vibration caused by her was no different from a huge wave in the weave. How could Duque not sense it? Little Illusia was about to remind Duque, but found that Duque's figure had already become a blur. Sartura pounced on Duque's afterimage. The light that burst forth from Duque's afterimage turned into a bunch of crows that flapped their wings and cawed. The ear-piercing sound, coupled with the strange undulations in the air, instead interfered with Sartura's judgment. For a moment, no one expected Sartura to be stunned at Duque's previous position. Duque's figure appeared again, this time to her left. However, the sudden stab of the spiral golden sword was caught by Sartura's claw. The spiral sword spun at high speed in the claw, making a zzz sound similar to the scraping of metal from a grinder. "I've caught you!" Sartura suddenly laughed coldly. "No, I've caught you." Duque responded with a polite smile. His smile caused Sartura to have a bad feeling. Sartura guessed correctly, but it was too late. Duque had a headache dealing with a boss with high speed and high agility like her. This was Thun's territory. It was possible to open a teleportation door here, but to use continuous flash, that was very difficult. If Sartura stubbornly avoided him and only ran to kill the other heroes of the Alliance, Duque would also have a headache. Since Sartura recklessly rushed over, Duque of course would gladly accept it. The spiral golden sword that seemed to be stuck suddenly burst forth with a golden light that was enough to blind any evil creature. Sartura instinctively wanted to run, but unfortunately in that moment of daze, the golden light had already turned into a large net, instantly covering half of Sartura's body. In the next moment, the head of a chicken leg staff was pressed against Sartura's cheek. Duque's short hair suddenly stood up along with the elemental tide that burst forth from his body. From the very end of the hair, the fire element that flowed out made Duque look like he had a head of fiery red hair. In the bright firelight, it reflected the cold expression on the face of this new demigod. Although Duque's body was already similar to many burly human males in this world, compared to her huge body, he was very small, only a third of her size. But now, in everyone's perception, Duque's body seemed to have suddenly grown 100 times larger, becoming a giant that could support the heavens and the earth. His pair of eyes seemed to be made of the purest obsidian, shining brightly and incomparably deep. The terrifying power that surged like a sea of fire formed a very dazzling ball of light, making the fire element gather crazily on the head of the staff at an extremely fast speed that bystanders could not imagine. Chapter 13:16. Compress again. In just 1/100th of a second, this dark cave that hadn't seen the light of day for thousands of years returned to the embrace of light. Facing such a powerful enemy, not only Sartura, but every leader of Courage felt a sense of helplessness and fear rise in their hearts. "No!" Sartura screamed shrilly and then did something that no one expected. She suddenly flashed, and no one knew how she did it, but in order to escape, she actually cut off her arm that was sealed by Duque. Not only that, a small part of the shoulder armor that was connected to her arm, yellow and green bodily fluids splattered all over the place, along with some pieces of her internal organs. She made such a huge sacrifice just for that moment of opportunity to escape. What a pity! Just as she escaped, Duque also flashed. The staff head that looked simple and unadorned, like a wooden chicken drumstick, was still stuck to Sartura's face at the same distance, not an inch more, not an inch less, still sticking close to Sartura's face. Not bad courage, too bad there's no reward. Following Duque's mockery, the demigod-level flame blast, smashed out from the staff head of Atish, directly exploded at 0 distance. Ah! Sartura let out the most tragic howl since the start of the battle. Her seemingly pretty face was originally covered by a veil, but under the terrifying power of the flame blast, all of her true form had to be revealed. That was the unique mouth part of an insect creature. The 2 cockroach leg-like antennae were instantly blasted in half, and half of its face instantly caved in. Its twisted neck couldn't help but have a large area of scorch marks appear on it. If it was just a simple flame blast, it wouldn't be able to take her life. In the next moment, only the people with the most powerful eyesight could see that the flames that should have exploded in all directions gathered again under the control of Duque's astonishing elemental control. 2 consecutive attacks. It wasn't as simple as duplicating the attack twice, but rather gathering the scattered elements once again and launching another destructive attack in an extremely short amount of time on the opponents already injured and starting to be damaged. Perhaps, in the eyes of those with poor eyesight, Duque instantly killed Sartura. Only those who saw this scene clearly would feel the shock of looking up to a great mountain. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The flames spread wantonly in the sky. Sartura's scorched black half-body fell heavily into the yellow sand at the bottom of the dark cave. This is the 3rd one. Prophet Skirum, Vistus, and Sartura. Then Magni, who had just come out of the portal that Duque had opened for him, muttered to himself. It was only at this moment that the Alliance powerhouses realized that as soon as Duque appeared, he had already killed 3 of Thun's generals. Roar! In the dark sky, the 2 beasts, Xianxia and Princess Huron, were fighting fiercely. The shockwaves from the clash of fire and nature elements continuously tortured the already unstable cave walls. The murals on the walls melted in the flames, and the acid that Princess Huron spat out splattered everywhere. More rocks collapsed and fell. The Alliance heroes who were fighting with the family of 3 had to constantly pay attention to the top of their heads to avoid being affected by this waterfall of rocks. The 2 larger bugs in the family of 3 easily caused the sand and rocks on the ground to form layers of broken waves, causing the Alliance heroes to be in a sorry state. The Rangers with light movements could still make do, but the others had to worry about whether they would fall into those ghastly cracks or be swept into the earthquake-like area. Duque didn't have the time to care about all of this. He didn't even have the time to look at what spoils of war he had gotten from killing Sartura. That was because in the darkness in the distance, 2 humanoid creatures that were 7 to 8 stories tall were charging over. Duque put Kalia down and said to Jaina, "I'll leave this to you." If it was possible, Duque naturally hoped to gather his superior forces to deal with the enemy. For example, he could leisurely take care of all the weaker leaders of the enemy, and then face Thun with a leisurely attitude. Unfortunately, he couldn't. In the battle between the 2 princesses in the sky, Xianxia clearly had the absolute upper hand. If he wanted her to decide the winner immediately, it would be difficult for her own mount. Rushing to decide the winner meant taking risks. Attacking recklessly was never Xianxia's forte. The Black Dragon Princess was better at using careful and continuous attacks to force the opponent into a desperate situation, and then killing them without suffering any injuries. Only when the situation was urgent and there was no other choice would Duque strictly order her to attack fiercely. So at this moment, Duque gave her a reassuring message: "Xianxia, just fight at your own pace." "Thank you, Master." Duque was a demigod, and one whose strength far exceeded hers, a demigod who had the chance to reach the highest position. Compared to being forced to serve a lowly human before, the current Duke made Xianxia feel better about her reputation. Being the mount of a powerful demigod sounded better than being the mount of a human. If not for the fact that they were in a fierce battle, Xianxia would have run over and taken the initiative to ask to tame a dragon. In a higher cave, half of the hero team led by Varian was fighting with the tenacious Vancaris. Obviously, the outcome would not be decided in a short period of time. It seemed that Oro's early death and the fall of Naxxramas had deeply stimulated Si Thun's side. Other than Oro and Si Thun, who was guarding the underground palace, all the leaders of Encourage who could fight were here. The two enemies who had come at this moment were naturally the twin emperors, Vecnalas the Great and Vec Lor the Great. Facing the twin emperors in the temple of Encourage, whose strength was second only to Si Thun, only Duque could come personally. Tyrant suddenly thought of something and exclaimed, "Wait! Duque, isn't one of the twin emperors immune to magic?" Duque laughed. If someone else had asked him, he would have definitely replied, "Who do you think I am?" As Duque's lover, Tyrant naturally did not need to refute. There was only a confident smile. In his left hand was the most simple and unadorned divine artifact magic staff, Atish, legendary staff of the Guardian. In his right hand was the sharp divine artifact longsword, Marcus, Song of Light and Darkness, with a peculiar spiral conical shape. Clang! At this moment, the sound of the sword resounded through the 9 heavens. The spiral sword in Duque's hand suddenly became dazzling. The entire holy sword seemed to have turned into the purest light, becoming the brightest light in the world. This sword illuminated the entire hell-like underground cave of the temple of Encourage. At this moment, not only did Duque's whole body burst out with the power of a demigod, but also a surging sword intent. Duque did not say a word. His attitude said everything. Today, not just a demigod, I will even kill a god for you to see. Chapter 13-17. The Twin Emperors. They had an incomparably deep impression in Duque's memory. After all, the Twin Emperors pioneered the warlocks as tank bosses. There was no other way. Because under Si Thun's divine blessing, Emperor Lor, commonly known as the Demon Emperor, was completely immune to physical attacks. He could only be injured by magical elements. On the other side, Emperor Lor, who held a giant sword and was commonly known as the Sword Emperor, was completely immune to magic. The divine power wrapped around his body would instinctively expel all magical elements. So the traditional way of fighting was to have a tank with the highest armor in the team carry the Sword Emperor and another warlock carry the Demon Emperor. Unfortunately, all the powerhouses in the Alliance hero group were in the middle of a fierce battle. There was no melee hero who could carry the monsters to help. Duque really wanted to take action again before the Twin Emperors arrived and free up some people, but unfortunately, he could not. 4 gazes full of powerful divinity crossed space and darkness and locked onto Duque. He did not know what went wrong, or if the history of Azeroth had taken a further serious turn. The Twin Emperors were demigods. As long as Duque dared to run and kill the other leaders just now, the Twin Emperors dared to teach Duque a deep and unforgettable lesson. If Duque dared to go and bully the noobs, then the Twin Emperors could too. They had known each other for so long. Even Valera and Brawl, who Duque had the least interaction with, were regarded as partners by Duque. Duque did not want to see anyone from the Alliance hero group die. So Duque's choice was to go straight up. At this moment, Duque's sword intent was high, and his sword intent was above all living beings, suppressing the entire Zerg race. In this dark and vast sky, Duque was the strongest existence that the Twin Emperors could not avoid. The Twin Emperors stopped far away. The Sword Emperor planted his giant sword on the ground, while the Demon Emperor put his hands on his hips. They were waiting for Duque to go over. A new demigod. That chaotic place should not be a demigod stage. Come here, a great battle needs a great stage. The Twin Emperors echoed each other, giving people the feeling of a two-man show. However, for a pair of brothers who had gone through thick and thin together, even sharing their life force, this kind of conversation couldn't be any more normal. The cloak on Duque's back fluttered in the wind as the elemental storm surged from Duque's body. A faint smile hung on Duque's face. At this moment, everyone could feel that they were bathed in Duque's battle intent, not in a smile. It was as if the spiral sword had replaced the sun hanging high in the sky, becoming the only source of light in this underground palace. In the next second, A wave of arcane elemental energy formed a huge wave, gently lifting Duque up. In the next second, a purple-blue arcane energy warship appeared. It supported Duque's body and moved forward proudly, arriving in front of the massive twin emperors. To the left was Sword Emperor Vecnulus. On the right front was the Demon Emperor Fu. They spoke. "We are called the Twin Emperors." Sword Emperor waved the sword in his hand. "I am Vecnulus." The Demon Emperor waved his staff. "I am Vecnulus. We bear the same fate. From the day we were born, we lived together, worked together, and faced the enemy together. The true battle of the pinnacle will be sung through the ages." The human demigod powerhouse, Duke Marcus. "The Emperor's modesty makes us disdain to fight two against one. You can choose a partner. This is our respect for you. This is also the respect you have for us." The words that seemed like a tongue twister didn't make Duque dizzy. Instead, it made Duque see an opportunity. Duque said in a teasing tone, "Huh? If I fight you 2 against 2 and we win, will there be additional prizes?" Sword Emperor's glistening yellow eyes widened. "The winner gets everything." The Demon Emperor's similarly colored eyes darkened. "The loser loses everything. The winner's reward should not be discounted. The loser's etiquette should be done to the extreme. If you and your comrades win, you will get what you want. If I and my brother win, we will also get a real reward from Master." Duque found the Twin Emperor's wager very interesting. Unfortunately, where could Duque find a partner who could fight against the Twin Emperors? Because the Twin Emperors would heal each other when they were close to each other, Duque's partner had to be at least 60 yards away to face one of the Emperors alone. This meant that Duque couldn't choose a warrior to tank the monsters. For example, even if Magni had the descent of God, he couldn't last that long. A real demigod was very difficult to kill in an instant. For example, when Master Howl killed the demigod Cenarius, it was ultimately because Cenarius used the forest as the source of his power. At that time, the entire Grey Valley and Fellwood Forest had already been infiltrated and polluted by demons. Cenarius' power was greatly reduced, and that was how Master Howl's shocking battle record came about. Duque knew that the Twin Emperors relied on those disgusting beetles. On Karaj, the number of insectoids was easily in the millions. His battle with the Twin Emperors was destined to be a tug-of-war. Magni definitely couldn't last that long. Duque cleared his throat. Just as he was about to say that he didn't have a partner, a graceful female figure that Duque was very familiar with stood beside Duque like lightning. "I, Servana's Windrunner, Queen of Sindorii, Duque's partner, will partner with Duque in this battle to fight against you." Duque was embarrassed on the spot. His mouth was half open, opening and closing like a fish that had been scooped out of the water, sucking in air fiercely. Queen, she was proud. From the day Duque met her, she didn't feel that she was inferior to anyone. It was fine during the second battle at the Dark Portal. What she couldn't stand the most was during the third battle, when her hometown was destroyed, but she couldn't do anything about it. Time flew, and the man who had conquered her body and mind had already become a demigod who looked down on all living things. As someone by his side, as a proud expert, as a queen who was determined to take revenge, she couldn't allow herself to stay where she was. So, this time, she wanted to challenge her limits. Duque's hands were trembling. Even he couldn't guarantee that he had the strength to look after Queen Shi. He really wanted to say something, but when the words reached his mouth, he couldn't say a single word. Instead, it was Queen Shi who spoke first. "What? I'm not the weak Kalia. And I'm not one of those seductive sluts who swayed their lewd bodies to tempt you. From the day I was born, I was destined not to be the kind of weakling who was willing to be protected by others, and who needed to be carefully cared for. Remember, my name is Servana's Windrunner." Her sonorous and forceful words shook Duque's soul. He really wanted to argue, really wanted to forcefully hold her down, and not let her do anything stupid. Suddenly, Duque smiled. Chapter 13:18. This is the Sylvanus Windrunner I know. Even at the end of his life. Even at the other side of the dead. Servanas who never gave up fighting against fate. In Duque's harem, there was obviously a hierarchy of power. Unlike Queen Sylvanas, Jaina, and Tyrant, who stood at the top of the mortal realm, Kalia and Alicia were lagging behind. Especially Kalia, as a greenhouse flower trapped in the Forbidden Palace in her early years, it was really difficult for her to participate in the cruel boss battles. Duque knew very well that Kalia did not want to be ostracized in the harem and become a mere flower vase or mascot. It was for similar reasons that Alicia chose to be the queen and to accompany him in battle. Queen Sylvanas, on the other hand, wanted to become stronger, hoping that she could shoulder the hopes of her fellow elves, hoping to take revenge on the scourge that destroyed her homeland. Stubbornness, resistance, and desire were the greatest motivations for her to become stronger. This was also why she chose to stand beside Duque at this moment, to fight against an enemy that she could not defeat. To be honest, Queen Sylvanas was very uneasy now. Her being here could be said to be courageous, but also reckless. As a mortal god, getting involved in a battle between demigods, one mistake would lead to eternal damnation. But she was not resigned to it. Courage was like a spine. In the face of danger, if you yielded once, it was easy to do it a second time, a third time, and you would never be able to stand up straight again. Who knew when the spine of courage would break? Sailing against the current, one who did not advance would be pushed back. She could not let it go, and had no reason to let it go. In her heart, Queen Sylvanas was prepared to be reprimanded by Duque, or even chased away by force. She even thought of dozens of reasons to argue with Duque. But there was no anger, no lesson. All she got was a look that said, "I understand you." Infinite gentleness and infinite trust. Not a single word. Instead, he just leaned over, hugged her waist just right, and kissed her gently. It wasn't the first time they had kissed, and it wasn't even the first time they had deep contact. However, this kiss made her feel like a little girl who didn't understand the ways of the world. It was as if she was in a dream. It was warm and full of moisture. After their lips parted and they stood up straight again, Duque and Servanas were no longer lovers. At this moment, they were comrades. The twin emperor's glistening yellow eyes stared at Queen Sylvanas for a long time, feeling deep veneration. A peak existence among mortals. He also has extraordinary courage. We are the twin emperors. I recognize you as my opponent. Queen Sylvie held the bow in her left hand and flung her cloak with her right hand, revealing an Arather gold coin. She flicked it into the air with her thumb and said loudly, "When the coin lands," the twin emperors replied in unison, "the moment when we start fighting each other." Duque's face stiffened. "All right, the twin emperors, come." The golden coin kept spinning in the air. It seemed to have lost the restraints of time and kept spinning, spinning, and spinning. The golden light kept flashing, but the four hearts were getting more and more nervous. After what seemed like a century, the coin finally fell to the ground, making a crisp, clang sound. The twin emperors' bodies, which were at least 7 stories tall, were like mountains toppling over, pressing down on Duque and Queen Sylvanas. At the same time, Queen Sylvanas and Duque moved at the same time and shot out like an arrow. Queen Sylvanas strode with lightning speed, and in the midst of her mad dash, she had already shot 3 arrows at the magic-immune sword emperor, Vecnolus the Great. The sharp arrows drew a straight line in the air, bringing with them 3 bolts of lightning as they pierced straight at Vecnolus. Vecnolus did not even frown. The broadsword, which was as wide as the main beam of a building, came crashing down, and the light of the sword drew a strange arc in the void. Whether it was a person or an arrow, it was impossible to resist the edge of the holy Courage greatsword. The 3 sharp arrows were about to be destroyed after a flash of the sword light. But the great emperor did not expect that Queen Sylvanas would use her left hand, which was holding the bow, to draw 3 extremely thin lines of lightning from her fingers, and actually pull the 3 arrows away from their predetermined trajectories. After the arrows changed direction in the air, they once again stabbed at Vecnolus, the emperor of the Courage Empire. Vecnolus was finally a little surprised. He did not expect that the arrows that were shot would have a second attack, especially when the arrows should have been cut down. But he still did not care. He was immune to magic, and the most powerful lightning power on the arrows was ineffective against him. Although the arrows would hit him, they might not be able to hit his vitals. If they hit his armor, it wouldn't matter. Secondly, the arrows were too small and lacked attack power. At this moment, Queen Sylvanas, in the midst of a high-speed dash, opened her left hand angrily again. The 3 arrows, which had already slowed down, suddenly sped up twice in an unscientific way. 2 arrows were shot at his eyes, and 1 was shot at his throat. Vecnilus had no choice but to stop and use his left hand, which was wearing armor, to protect his vital parts with a backhand slap, and at the same time, hit the 3 arrows away. And Queen Sylvanas had already taken this opportunity to shoot 3 rounds of arrows, a total of 9 arrows. She manipulated the current of the lightning and easily let the arrows that flew out get a better angle of entry. For a moment, the arrows all drew beautiful arcs in the air and hit the target that she wanted to shoot. Armpits, elbows, knees, ankles. Although these were protected by armor, they were still vulnerable parts with gaps, and were the targets that Queen Sylvanas wanted to hit. Years of fighting against giant-like creatures had made her give up the fantasy of killing with 1 shot. Instead, she used a more practical method, which was to paralyze the opponent as much as possible or to weaken the opponent's movement. When all 9 arrows hit, and she felt that Vecnilus's movement speed had obviously slowed down, Queen Sylvanas could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. This kind of magical second or even third stage control, Queen Sylvanas only had a success rate of more than 50% in practice. All 9 arrows hit the target. It was almost a stroke of genius, and even she did not think that she could actually succeed. But if she had to use a word to describe her mood at this moment, it was simply cool. The battle was just the beginning. The next moment, the huge Emperor Keela sword had already slashed down. Queen Sylvanas made a flexible twisting movement while moving forward at high speed and narrowly dodged the sword. At the same time, while quickly dodging to the left, she shot another 3 arrows, one of which hit the Emperor's neck, but it was obvious that it was a muscle. For Vecnilus's thick neck, which was so thick that at least 2 people would need to wrap their arms around it, the bowl-sized wound on the neck muscle was not considered serious. Chapter 1319. The Emperor suddenly used brute force to change the direction of the giant sword and swept it horizontally. Queen Sylvanas made an extremely exaggerated backward movement, her body above her knees almost parallel to the ground, and narrowly dodged another attack. She then made 3 backflips in a row before stopping the powerful momentum. During the backflips, she shot 9 more arrows. At this time, Duque was fiercely attacking the demon Emperor Vector. In the image transmission of the magic eyes, Duque saw that Queen Sylvanas almost had the carvings at the front of her breastplate cut off by the Sword Emperor's greatsword. Duque's face turned green. Did she really think that there would be 1 less benefit from now on? Even if Queen Sylvanas became an undead like in history, Duque would still like her. It couldn't be helped that Queen Sylvanas danced on the edge of the sword. Her greatest weapon was evasion. If she didn't appear, then Duque would have to use the mirror reality to pull the Sword Emperor. That was also a very dangerous choice. Since she was here, Duque had to believe in her. That's right, Queen Sylvanas was definitely delicate and weak compared to the 7-story Sword Emperor Vector. She would die if she was hit by a sword. On the other hand, as long as she was focused enough and didn't get hit by a single move, it would be her victory. She alone, of course, would never be able to kill the twin emperors. Note that the lives of the twin emperors were shared. Her bow and arrows couldn't hurt them, but Duque could. After confirming once again that there wouldn't be a second existence besides him that could attract the attention of the demon Emperor Vector, Duque went all out. The thin lines of the elemental laws crisscrossed back and forth. The 2 demigods, with their deepest understanding of elemental magic, performed a gorgeous epic duel. It was a battle of great momentum. Behind Duque, the entire sky was inverted. Countless arcane missiles poured down like a meteor shower, drawing countless dazzling parallel lines and bombarding the demon emperor. Not only that, but the weave was also expanding greedily, like the beating of a heart. Every time it contracted and expanded, the area of the weave could be seen to increase. Every time the area of the weave expanded, the power of the spells blasting out of the weave would increase by 10%. Veclor's eyes narrowed. He raised his imperial Kiraj staff high, and a huge screen of light as black as ink rose behind him, enveloping the entire hall. Shadow energy floated on the screen like grease, emitting an evil and decaying aura. At the same time, he extended his withered left claw and pointed at Duque. Countless black spiritual energy beams shot toward Duque's arcane missiles. The Demon King, Emperor Lore, was also a super expert who was proficient in many types of magic. The arcane magic, wide area magic burst technique, was also one of his specialties. However, after the spellcasters entered the demigod realm, the way they fought would naturally change drastically. Just like how it was impossible to burn Ragnaros to death with fire, Lore similarly could not use arcane magic to kill a demigod whose core was arcane magic, even if it was a newly advanced demigod. With a thought, the countless beetles on the ground began to approach Duque, intentionally or unintentionally. Duque sneered. Self-destructing bug? Can't you be a little more creative? In his previous life, as a player, he obviously did not have the ability to deal with beetles that would constantly respawn and never finish killing. In this life, as a true demigod of Azeroth, he had plenty of ways to deal with the Demon King. As expected, a bug that was originally only the size of a palm suddenly grew rapidly under Lore's infusion of magic. In the blink of an eye, it became a giant the size of a carriage. Bang! The bug exploded. What splashed out was not flames like in history, but extremely corrosive acid. Ha! Duque revealed a playful smile. Duque did not need to do anything. In the weave, dozens of burly figures wrapped in raging flames rushed out. Fire demon guards. Manager Majordomo Executus thugs and meat shields. Now that Majordomo Executus had become Duque's elemental emissary and was in charge of managing the weave, his underlings naturally became part of the weave. In the Molten Core, the fire demon guards were more like pure, strong warriors, but here, they were more like Balrogs from the scorching hell. However, their skin was still crimson, not golden red like the Balrogs. They were also covered in blazing flames, looking quite formidable. To be honest, Duque did not have much hope in the combat power of these fire demon guards. Since the Demon King was harassing him with cannon fodder, he could not focus on dealing with them. All the command was handed over to Majordomo Executus, who had integrated with the weave. However, after the fire demon guards became purer elemental creatures, they were really powerful. They could actually drive all the bugs, big or small, out of a radius of 30 meters around Duque. Humph! Veclor looked unhappy. Suddenly, those big beetles were no longer simple self-destructing bugs. They became the size of rhinoceroses, and their bodies emitted pink crystal light. Dozens of crystal beetles rushed up and fought evenly with the fire demon guards. Oh! With a thought from Duque, a modified version of the fire elemental jumped out of the illusory weave. On the surface, this was a fire elemental bathed in fire. However, there was a huge change in body shape. It was the Balrog from the Lord of the Rings world, where the white sword St. Gandalf was. With the appearance of a demon, the Balrog was good at using whips and beheading swords. Roar! This Balrog, which did not exist in the world of Azeroth, stabbed the flaming sword in its right hand into the ground as soon as it appeared. With this action, brilliant flames suddenly rose from the void, followed by magma pouring out of the void on the spot. Many golden rivers hung upside down in the void, lighting up the entire Twin Emperor's Hall. Spreading along the golden beam of light, even the ground began to turn into a state of melting magma. Every crystal beetle that was touched immediately emitted a zzz sound, which made one's hair stand on end when they heard it. The defenses of these crystal beetles that were specialized by Veclor were extremely frightening. A single pillar of lava fire couldn't even melt their outer shells, but as 2, 3, and even more pillars of lava fire condensed into lava spears, the high temperature and sharpness combined into one body, The only outcome for these sturdy monsters was to shriek as they turned into a pile of charcoal. The golden light of the fire illuminated the face of Emperor Vector. He finally realized how difficult it was to deal with the newly promoted demigod standing in front of him. In terms of the total amount and quality of magic, Duque was not inferior to him, a veteran demigod. In terms of multicasting and the strength of his generals, he was also superior. In Duque's weave, more kinds of attack magic began to emerge, breaking through the obstruction of the shadow arrow rain and hitting the magic shield of the demon emperor. Chapter 1320. The demon king waved the Courage imperial staff as his mind worked rapidly, thinking about the situation. The situation was clear now. His brother, Vecnalas, had the absolute advantage against Servanas and was constantly pressuring him. On the other side, in the elemental domain, he was severely restricted by Duque, who specialized in 3 elements and had decent strength in the other 3. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before he was defeated. The current situation was a bit like an Ouroboros. The snake head at the back wanted to devour the snake tail at the front, and whoever devoured it faster would be the winner. Was it Vecnalas who killed Servanas first? Or would Duque exhaust them by attacking him first? In the end, he made a decision. It was a cruel order. Hundreds of insects grew in size at once. They had all sorts of characteristics. Some were filled with fire elements, some were frost, and some were acid. These insects ignored the attacks of the fire demon guards and Balrogs and charged at Duque, who was standing in the air on an arcane throne of energy. Unexpectedly, even though the formation had been penetrated, not a single fire demon guard left the front line. They even ignored the pursuit and continued to attack the beetles within their attack range. In the weave, a new elemental creation appeared. This time, it was a giant surrounded by thunder and lightning. In the name of Thaddeus, I declare that no existence can surpass me and attack my master. This thunder giant, who had the appearance of a holy knight, snapped his fingers, and a large number of beetles that had charged through the line of defense suddenly jumped out of nowhere. After a series of thunderous explosions, the entire world became quiet. Vecnalas didn't even frown, and directly let more beetles burrow out of the cracks in the ground. They kept charging, growing larger, and pounced at the continuous line of fire and thunder. It was hard to say if this scene was tragic or cruel. These creatures, born in the darkness and raised as weapons, were like moths at this moment, rushing wave after wave towards the impenetrable line of defense. Their lives seemed cheap and pitiful, but as long as they could successfully obstruct Duque's casting for a moment, in the eyes of the twin emperors, their lives had meaning. Vecnalas began to cast a spell. It was a spell completely different from attack magic. Teleportation. If there were no accidents, the twin emperors would immediately swap the 2 brothers. The sword emperor, who was immune to magic, would come to Duque, while the demon emperor, who was immune to physical attacks, would go against Servanas. Duque snorted coldly, and a fireball the size of a small sentry tower smashed into Veclor's body. The flames instantly burned through the demon emperor's left shoulder armor. Not only the armor, but almost half of his left shoulder was burned to ashes. However, he didn't seem to be in pain. He just smiled as if he was announcing his victory. In Duque's Spirit Sea, the Demon King transmitted this message. Master said that only existences that are allowed to teleport in his sacred land can exist. Duque shuddered. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to. Stepping into a true god's territory was like stepping into their domain. See Thun's berserk divine power wantonly spread throughout the entire Courage temple. Expanding the magic net for Duque was a very, very strenuous task. It was obviously a thankless task. Duque had to do this, or else he would be cut off from all power in the outside world. As a newly ascended demigod, Duque's own divine power reserves and magic reserves were definitely the lowest. He had just constructed the prototype of the magic net when he was forced to join the battle. If his source of magic and the support of the magic net were blocked, then Duque wouldn't be much different from an ordinary Breaking Dawn archmage. At most, he would just be a little tougher. Fortunately, Duque grasped too many types of elements. Even Si Thun couldn't expel all 6 of Duque's major elements. This was like patching. If it was 1 or 2 holes, it would be easy to patch, but if it was a wicker basket full of holes, then what the hell was there to patch? So no matter how hard Si Thun tried to suppress him, Duque still expanded his magic net bit by bit, whether it was the total amount of magic or the volume of the magic net itself. But Si Thun could completely mess up the spatial coordinates of the temple. At this moment, Duque couldn't feel any clear spatial coordinates. The next moment, Emperor Vechlor was about to switch places with his brother. At this moment, Duque didn't even bother to show the slightest bit of nervousness on his face. It was just that his left hand was still tightly gripping the divine artifact magic staff, Atish, which was somewhat famous even among the Kiraj insect people. "You're just bluffing." Vechlor snorted disdainfully. He had already thought about how he was going to torture that jumping female elf after the teleportation. The surrounding images suddenly blurred. This was the inevitable situation of teleportation. But a second later, the Nephilim king was stunned. Duque hadn't been left behind by him at all. Duque had completed a successful teleportation just like him. This wasn't a simple thing. After Si Thun had mixed up almost all the spatial coordinates here, any teleportation or flash was an extremely high-risk gamble. If he wasn't careful, he would get stuck in the pillars of the temple, or even in some unknown spatial rift, and be done for. He couldn't help but exclaim. He never dreamed that Duque would be so decisive. What he really couldn't understand was how Duque had located the spatial coordinates. Duke smiled, and with a flying kick, he kicked the dumbfounded Queen Xi's buttocks. The surging arcane elemental energy sent Queen Zeline flying towards Sword Emperor Vecnolf, who was 100 meters away. "Duque, you bastard!" Queen Sylvanas was a little exasperated. Duque clearly had a better way, but he chose to do this. Was this humiliation? Or was it flirting? Regardless of that, the Sword Emperor's sword light fell again, and Queen Sylvanas had to focus on dodging and counterattacking again. On this side, the Nephilim king only got a contemptuous smile from Duque. "My flames are my lighthouse in the void." In response to Duke's words, Vechlor's charred left shoulder, which had already been completely extinguished, once again ignited with a blazing red flame. The raging flames surged incessantly along his arm, spreading to his left elbow and the left side of his neck in an instant. He had underestimated his enemy. He didn't think that Duque's manipulation of the elements was so high. In his impression, that should be the means of the fire demon king Ragnaros, who knew that Duque could be like a phoenix, giving birth to flames from ashes again, burning the enemy's body a second time, and once again turning it into an accelerant for the rolling flames. Vecnolaz's expression finally changed, and he felt anxious. Chapter 1321. They were both demigods, but the gap was so huge. Duque was clearly just a newly minted demigod, but his proficiency in using power was above him. Although their domains were different, and strictly speaking, Duque was a demigod mage for humans and elves, while Vechlor was a demigod mage for the Kiraj insect people, there should not be such a gap. Vechlor could not help but look at the seemingly inconspicuous wooden staff in Duque's hand. An extremely rare space-type magic staff? For a new demigod to have such wealth, even Vechlor was secretly envious of him. "After I kill you, your staff will be my spoils of war." The Kiraj insect people were the model race of the strong preying on the weak. At this moment, Vechlor looked at Duque with a bit more greed and jealousy. Vechlor exploded all the shadow elements he had accumulated in one breath, and the dark shadow elements easily extinguished the flames on his body. "So, what? Want to call your brother over?" Duque teased the Demon King. "We don't need both of us to deal with you." Vechlor's face turned cold. To be honest, the twin emperors attacking together was a bit troublesome. They would heal themselves at every turn, and Duque was not sure if he could successfully use counterspell on the twin emperors. Duque had his own confidence. Glancing at the needle on the gadget in his hand, Duque laughed in his heart and began to focus most of his attention on Queen Sylvanas. Queen Sylvanas worked very hard. It was rare that after fighting for so long, her rhythm was not messed up at all. Every time he dodged, it was just right. He didn't spend too much energy, and every time he dodged, even if it was just 1 millimeter. She would never let herself be in the dangerous splash range. At the same time, she would never let herself expend too much energy. This kind of exquisite, almost scalpel-level movements could only be done by someone who used her agility to the extreme. Among the 4 Windrunner sisters, if there was one who had the best chance of breaking through to the level of demigod, it would definitely be Sylvanas. Lilith's talent was too poor, reaching the hero domain was already her limit. Sasha was very talented, but it was a pity that she was too kind. In terms of talent, Aurelia was on the same level as Queen Sylvia. The problem was that she often considered too much when faced with problems. She cared too much about the big picture, and this weakness limited her on the path of battle. Only Sylvanas, with her unyielding spirit, successfully acted out what it meant to be a rebel of fate. He was unwilling to be left behind. She was not willing to be a good wife and mother. She was not willing to be a country's mascot, a vase in a duke's mansion. It was because of so much unwillingness that she became who she was now. In order to break through to the demigod realm, other than Duque, who had the help of the system elf to cheat, or Medivh, who was a freak with extraordinary talents, the best whetstone was to fight a real demigod in a battle of life and death. Although it was dangerous, under such circumstances, breaking through was the fastest and most likely. Now it seemed that Queen She had done a good job. But Vekler wasn't good. His magic was suppressed by Duque, and this was when Duque was clearly distracted. Logically speaking, any distraction or carelessness during a battle with Pharaoh would be fatal. This was because it could affect the elemental guidance or the arrangement of incantations, and could even destroy a forbidden spell, blowing himself up before killing the enemy. But Duque was a weirdo. With his mind on his sister, his left hand held a tiche and continued to guide the elemental guidance, while his right hand made the casting gestures without the slightest bit of confusion. Even more shamelessly, he pulled out more things from the magic net. A replica of the curator, made entirely of arcane elements, appeared. With the earth as armor and pure arcane energy as his body, this curator used a continuous rain of arcane missiles to clear a large wave of beetles as soon as he appeared. It wasn't just him. There was also a smaller frost dragon made of the purest frost elements. It appeared out of thin air, facing the Demon King's shadow arrow rain head-on, and opened its mouth to spit out an ultra-pure frost dragon breath. The benefits of Duque's split control were vividly displayed at this moment. As long as he could still connect to the magic net, the 6 elemental emissaries could command various elemental creatures from a safe place to attack Duque's enemies through the magic net. On the contrary, the Demon King Vekler could only rely on himself. Damn! After a furious roar, the Demon King changed tactics. Those large-sized beetles no longer blindly rushed to their deaths. More and more beetles began to climb onto his huge, but seemingly skinny body. Duque narrowed his eyes. There was an indescribable feeling in them. As expected, a change had come. Although he didn't know how they got their human forms, Duque could be sure that, at least in this world of Azeroth, the twin emperors were the emperors of the Karaji insect people empire. The emperor of the insects, of course, wouldn't be human. So the twin emperors were also insects. All the little insects not only worshipped their emperors, but were also willing to give up their lives. The insects that turned pink were crystallized. They greatly increased the hardness of their bodies. The ones that turned white were ice elemental, yellow were fire elemental, and violet were arcane elemental. Duque had never imagined that Vekler could use such a miraculous method to forcefully increase his physical defense and elemental absorption ability. Originally, in terms of communication with the elemental realm, Duque was far ahead of Vekler. Now, the Demon King had obviously pulled this gap to a point where it wasn't too great. As a price, Vekler's body was already huge enough. After thousands of insects climbed up, his body grew even taller, becoming as tall as a 10-story building. Queen Sylvanas naturally noticed the changes here. She only glanced over, and her whole body quivered. That's right. Thousands of wriggling insects were climbing up, even biting and devouring each other. This scene, this sound, was challenging the limits of a woman's senses. Queen Sylvanas didn't have the luxury to pay attention to the Demon King, and she firmly believed that Duque could handle it better than her. On the other side, looking at Vekler, the Demon King, turning himself into a fortress-like existence, Duque was a little dumbfounded. Bastard! You're forcing me to use my ultimate move. I originally wanted to leave it for your master. Duque seemed to say this without rhyme or reason. At first, the Demon King was very nervous. Who knew that a minute had passed, 2 minutes had passed, 5 minutes had passed. Even after the Gemini swapped positions 10 times, nothing happened. Duque took advantage of his elemental purity and continued to attack like a tidal wave, killing Vekler's insects wave after wave. However, Vekler used the insects' lives to fill in the gaps, using insect lives to buy time, and fighting evenly with Duque. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.